Hello and good evening to the second class of Ecology and Environment. I am Dr. Shivan. Yesterday we did the basics of environment. Today we are going to continue with that, finish the basics of environment, revise the one pager, do a test of 12 questions, revise all the DPSPs, and in this class, if you can see and hear me, please write yes in the discussions box and let's get started. Pranam, good evening. If you can see and hear me, please write yes in the discussions. Okay, wonderful. All right, so let's get started. Before I get started, there are two announcements. Firstly, the slides for today and the one pager is already uploaded. If you can't see it, just refresh the portal and it will be available to you. Here, one thing I want to point out that the one pager for today does not have the information of biogeochemical cycles. This we will revise tomorrow. Okay, so आज तक जितना one pager है that has been uploaded. Biogeochemical cycles I will teach today. It's not there in the one pager because बहुत ज़्यादा हो जाता है एक दिन revise करने के लिए. We'll revise that tomorrow. In environment, since the prelims is close, मैंने सोचा है कि मैं सारे one pages class में revise कराऊंगा ताकि आपका टाइम कम से कम लगे. Second, tomorrow you will not need them, but from class 4 we are going to class 4 and 5. जो class 4 and 5 होगी उसमें mainly हमें maps का काम है. We are going to draw all of India's national parks, all of India's tiger reserves, all of India's Ramsar sites, all of India's elephant reserves, and all the wildlife sanctuaries that are in the news in one map. We are also going to map them with the rivers that are present in India. Okay, so for that you will need certain maps, right? तो इसके लिए मैं आपको रिक्वेस्ट करूंगा कि या तो आप डिजिटली या फिजिकली प्लीज कैरी द फिजिकल मैप ऑफ इंडिया or the political map of India. Either is okay. Physical, political, either is okay. Political is generally better because इसमें आपको states भी mark हो जाएंगे, है ना? But from class number 4, please have these maps ready with you. कल नहीं चाहिए, परसों चाहिए. So I am informing you in advance. Okay. All right. Now let's get started. Yesterday we had left ourselves at biotic interactions. What are biotic interactions? Biotic interactions are interactions that are happening between two living beings. इसके काफी सारे examples हमने कल पढ़े थे, है ना, कि किस तरह से होता है. We had done the representation also, plus plus, plus minus, plus zero, some things like this we had already studied. अब उसके जो examples हैं, किन species में क्या हो रहा है, let's start with that. तो पहले हमने पढ़ा था mutualism. Mutualism is both are benefiting, so it is represented as plus and plus. अब म्यूचुअलिज्म के जो एग्जांपल्स हैं उसमें व्हाट वी कैन सी हियर, लेट्स जस्ट सी दोज एग्जांपल्स. या ओके, तो पहला एग्जांपल है एग्जांपल ऑफ एंट्स एंड एफिड्स. नाउ वी नो व्हाट एंट्स आर. एफिड्स आर स्मॉल organisms that are present over ants. So what the ants do, they farm the aphids by protecting them from predators and they move them from one place to another. In return, aphids are secreting a sweet substance called honeydew. This honeydew is being eaten by the ant. So ant and aphid, it is a mutualism based relationship because both are benefiting. Similarly, in pollination, it can be said to be mutualism in some cases. In some cases, it will be called proto-cooperation. So how will we know the difference? अगर कोई ऐसा plant है that always depends on pollinators, जिसका pollinator के बिना काम नहीं चलता, means a plant that cannot do self fertilization. जिस plant में self fertilization की ability है ही नहीं, उस plant में तो pollination becomes mutualism because it is obligatory. It will always require a pollinator. But कुछ plants में there is ability of self fertilization, right? उन cases में pollination will become proto cooperation because it is not completely necessary. इससे let us see कि आपको कितना याद है. ऐसा ही हमने एक plant पढ़ा था जिसमें self pollination की problem थी. And to deal with that self-pollination problem, we had done certain modifications, certain genetic modification. Can you remember the name of this GM plant? जिसमें self-pollination की problem को deal करने के लिए I had done some genetic modification. It is in the news also this time. So can you remember the name of this plant? No, tell me the complete name, not just the name of the plant, the complete name. It starts with D. Your answer is correct. Good. It is DMH11, Dhara Mustard Hybrid 11. We had studied this. It had a technology called Barney's and Barstar technology. We have already read this. DMH11 that has Barney's and Barstar. Okay. This technology is there. We had read about this already. I am not repeating now. तो इसमें भी इस प्लांट में सेल्फ पॉलिनेशन को हटाने के लिए वी हैड डन दिस. ओके. नेक्स्ट इज सिम्बायोसिस. Symbiosis just means that they are living together. Right? Now this can be beneficial also, this can be harmful also. यहाँ जो symbiosis के example हैं, they are beneficial symbiosis. The first example is of mycorrhiza. Mycorrhiza क्या है? Symbiotic association between fungi and roots of plant. क्या होता है इसमें? That the fungi help the plant to absorb certain nutrients, mainly nitrogen. So the fungi help the plant absorb nutrients from the soil. And plants, they provide fungi with carbohydrate or food. So fungi will help them to get nutrients from the soil and plants will provide the fungi with food. We had read about fungal hyphae in Science and Tech also, right? Same concept. Then the other example is coral and zooxanthellae. So corals kya hai? Corals are basically animals, okay? And zooxanthellae is a type of algae. So coral reefs are formed by the symbiotic association of corals and a type of algae called zooxanthellae. What is the coral doing? The coral is providing shelter to the zooxanthellae. And what is the zooxanthellae? What is the algae doing? Algae is providing food to the coral. So the algae provide the coral with food through photosynthesis, while the coral provides the algae with a protective environment and access to sunlight. So support, shelter and access to sunlight. So this is also a symbiotic interaction where they are living together. If you have heard this term, although हम ये term detail में पढ़ेंगे, but if you have heard this term called coral bleaching. Coral bleaching. Bleach क्या होता है? Bleach means to paint something white. जैसे shirts को हम bleach करते हैं, let's say you have a white shirt and you want to clean it, you would bleach it, right? You make it white. This is corals losing their color. When there is a lot of pollution in the sea, what happens is that corals lose this association of coral and zooxanthellae, and this losing of this symbiotic association means that the corals stop displaying their color. हम ये बात डिटेल में बाद में पढ़ेंगे. I am just telling you right now that corals lose this symbiotic association in the presence of lot of pollution, and this is the phenomena of coral bleaching. Now since coral bleaching shows that the water is polluted, if there is coral bleaching happening, coral in this symbiosis, the corals are colored. But when they lose this symbiosis, they become white. That would be the phenomena of coral bleaching. Now, what is coral bleaching showing? Coral bleaching is sort of indicating, that there is pollution. It is an indication of pollution. So, it is sort of indicating that there is pollution in the sea. Therefore, corals are also known as indicator species. As indicator species. What are indicator species? What is coral bleaching? We will see in detail. But आगे के लिए just giving you an idea. Okay. All right. Moving forward, then we were seeing proto-cooperation. This slide is just copied once, so I'll just go here. Same example is given. In proto-cooperation, what did we see? That both the species are benefiting, but this is not a permanent survival-based thing. This could be a temporary thing also, right? This could be a temporary thing also. Okay. So अब इसका एग्जाम्पल देखते हैं. फर्स्ट एग्जाम्पल इज लायन एंड हाइना. नाउ बोथ लायन एंड हाइना, यूजुअली द इंटरेक्शन बिटवीन लायन एंड हाइना इज वन ऑफ competition. They are competing. Lion and hyena are usually competing for prey, competing for meat, competing for things that they could eat. But sometimes they will cooperate to kill a particular animal. Sometimes when they cooperate to kill a particular animal, or sometimes they may cooperate to take a kill away from a tiger. That would be an example of proto-cooperation. So as you can see, it is temporary. It has nothing to do with their survival. Even without this, the lion and hyena can survive. जरूरी नहीं है उनके लिए करना. But sometimes they will cooperate. So it is called proto-cooperation. Okay. Now there are birds and grazing animals. देखो, इसमें क्या होता है कि जैसे मान लो यहाँ ग्रास है. right? If there is grass, now a grazing animal, let's say like an elephant, and please excuse my drawing, but let's say an elephant is here and it is walking on this grass. So when it walks on the grass, यहाँ पे जो छोटे छोटे insect हैं, elephant का weight बहुत ज़्यादा होता है. When it walks on the grass, the small insects, they come up like this. Okay. So these small insects, when they come up like this, it is possible that they might irritate the elephant by getting into its eye, by getting into its ear. So what the bird does, the bird comes and eats this. These small insects that are disturbed when the elephant steps on the grass. When the elephant steps on the grass shakes. The small insects are disturbed. When these small insects are disturbed, there is a chance that they might irritate the elephant. So the bird will come and start eating these small insects. This is not necessary for their survival. Even without this, the elephant would survive. Even without this, the bird would survive. But there is cooperation. So this is an example of proto-cooperation. So as you can see here, some species of birds will follow grazing animals such as cattle, bison, elephants, to feed on the insects that are disturbed by the animal's movement. So when the animals are moving, the grass gets disturbed. Grass disturb हो गई तो छोटे छोटे insects हवा में आ गए, वो bird खा लेते हैं. So this is benefiting both of them, but of course not necessary for their survival. So it would be called proto-cooperation. Now, next thing we read was parasitism. Parasitism was represented by +/-. So parasitism is when one is benefiting and the other is getting harmed. But what was the special character here? That the victim or the one that was getting harmed does not get killed. This was the difference between parasitism and predation. In predation, the victim was being killed, but here the victim is not being killed. Right? So here the example is of ticks and mammals. Now tick was a parasite, right? It can like feed on mammals. We have seen there are ectoparasites that stay outside the body, endoparasites that stay inside the body. If you can remember, you can also tell me that tick used to carry, it was a vector of a particular disease. So if you can tell me which disease was tick the vector of, I will be very impressed if you can tell me this without looking back. Okay. Then the other example is dodder and plant. Dodder is a parasitic plant. It attaches itself to other plants. So it's a parasitic plant that would attach itself to other plant and steal the nutrients from them. So it will steal nutrients and water, right? So it benefits, like it will benefit from the plant that it's parasiting on, and the plant that is the victim, it will lose nutrients and it will lose resources. So this is also a parasitic relationship. Okay. Next is commensalism. Commensalism was represented by +/0, meaning one species was benefiting, but the other one was not gaining any advantage. So here we have the example of barnacles and whales. Barnacles are small animals in the sea. So they are small animals in the sea. They are maritime crustaceans. Okay. So they attach themselves to the skin of whales, right? So when the whale moves from one place to the other, barnacles get transported. वो क्या करते हैं? वो अब whale के पीछे खुद को attach कर लेते हैं. जब whale एक जगह से दूसरी जगह move करती है, तो they also get moved. They also get transported. So barnacles को तो फायदा होता है. Barnacles gain the advantage, but the whale does not get impacted at all. So it is represented by +/0. The next example is epiphytes and trees. What are epiphytes? Epiphytes are those plants that grow on other plants, such as climbers, right? So they use the bark of the tree or the trunk of the tree to climb and gain access to sunlight, right? So from the structure of the tree, let's say this is the tree. This is the tree. The epiphyte would climb like this and reach the top and gain sunlight access, right? So it will gain from the structure of the tree, but the tree itself will not have any impact. So it would be represented as +/0, and this idea would be called epiphytes in trees, called commensalism. Okay. Then there is amensalism. Amensalism was represented, it was the complete opposite of commensalism. It was represented with the idea of -/0. So one species was the victim or it was being harmed and the other one had no impact. इसका example देखते हैं. So there are something called black walnut trees, right? They release a chemical called juglone. It's written here, chemical called juglone. Now when they release this chemical, if there is a black walnut tree here, it will release the chemical in its surrounding. Surrounding में क्या होगा? कि जो बाकी प्लांट्स हैं उनकी ग्रोथ इनहिबिट हो जाएगी. इट विल इनहिबिट द ग्रोथ ऑफ अदर प्लांट्स. सो दैट लीड्स टू द आइडिया ऑफ अमेंसलिज्म, दैट अदर प्लांट्स गेट हार्म्ड बट ब्लैक वॉलनट ट्री हैज नो इम्पैक्ट. सो माइनस और जीरो. Similarly, there are certain bacteria that produce antibiotics outside their body. What do? There are certain bacteria. There are bacteria like this that produce antibiotics outside their body. They release the chemicals outside their body, so they will kill other bacteria. So they are having no impact, but the other one is being harmed. So this relationship would be called amensalism. Negative/0. So antibiotic producing bacteria that produce antibiotics that inhibit the growth of other bacteria in the same environment, right? So this is also an example of this biotic interaction. तो कल जो हमने biotic interactions पढ़ी थी उनके examples हम देख रहे थे. The last one we are going to read is competition. Competition is negative for both, right? Both are getting negatively impacted. So like I told you, lions and hyenas generally, mostly they are competing. Generally they are competing. So that is lion and hyena when they are competing for the same prey. Now what is competition related to? Competition is related to niche overlap. Okay, ये बात हमने कल पढ़ी है. There is niche overlap. इसके साथ एक principle भी connected था called Gauss law. What was Gauss law? Gauss law talked about competitive exclusion. Okay, so then there is competition between lion and hyena. मान लो lion की population भी बहुत ज्यादा हो जाए और hyena की population भी बहुत ज्यादा हो जाए. The resources stay limited, so one species population will have to go down, right? The second one is trees in a forest. In a forest where there are so many trees, they are all competing for the same resource of water, the same resource of sunlight to do the process of photosynthesis. So this is also an example of competition. Now, यहां तक हमने समझ लिया. हमने biotic interactions कल पढ़ी थी, हमने उनके कुछ examples देख लिए, right? Now let us read a very different type of biotic interaction called allelopathy, right? Allelopathy क्या है? It is a chemical interaction between plants in which one plant would release certain chemicals or secondary metabolites or certain products that affect the growth of other plants. एक plant है, वो soil में या air में या decomposition के through कुछ chemicals release करता है या कोई प्रोडक्ट रिलीज करता है जिससे दूसरे प्लांट की ग्रोथ अफेक्ट होती है. दिस कुड बी पॉजिटिव ग्रोथ, दिस कुड बी नेगेटिव ग्रोथ. ओके, सो देयर इज अ केमिकल इंटरेक्शन बिटवीन प्लांट्स इन विच वन प्लांट रिलीजेस केमिकल्स और सेकेंडरी मेटाबोलाइट्स दैट अफेक्ट द ग्रोथ, सर्वाइवल और रिप्रोडक्शन ऑफ अनदर प्लांट. द केमिकल प्रोड्यूस्ड बाय वन प्लांट कैन ईदर बी हार्मफुल or beneficial to another plant species, right? So if you are producing certain chemicals, they can be harmful or they can be beneficial, the chemicals that are released by one plant. अब ये कैसे रिलीज होते हैं? There are three processes. One is called leaching, one is called volatilization, and the third is called decomposition. So let's see these processes in detail, right? अब मान लो ये आपका वो main plant है which is producing the chemical, and this is the plant which is the receiver. So the first one is called leaching. It produces certain chemicals here. They get entrapped in the soil or they are transferred into the soil with water. This process is called leaching. Okay, leaching. When these chemicals that are produced, they get entrapped into the soil or they transfer into the soil with water. Now once they are in the soil through the process of leaching, they are then taken up by this plant. So this is the first process, leaching, through which chemicals can reach from one plant to the other. The second process is called volatilization. Volatilization would be that this is the plant, it produces certain chemicals in the air. When it produces the chemicals in the air, they are absorbed by the second plant. तो पहला क्या था? उसने plant ने chemicals produce किए, it produced the chemicals got entrapped in the soil with water called leaching. The second one is it produced the chemicals in the air and the air was then uptaken by the second plant or the receiver plant. So this is the process of volatilization. The third one is the process of decomposition. This plant produces chemicals within itself, अपने अंदर ही. When this plant dies, it is decomposed. ये हमने कल देखा था. There are decomposers, there are detritivores. When this plant dies, it gets decomposed. Then after decomposition, the chemicals come in the soil and then it is taken up by the other plant. So three processes through which allelopathy could happen. One is leaching, second is volatilization, third is decomposition. Through this, chemicals could reach from one plant to the next one. Okay. Now, allelopathy can have both negative and positive effects, right? But mostly it has negative effects. Mostly allelopathy has negative effects, but it could have both negative and positive. So if it is producing a chemical that would inhibit the growth of other plants, right? If it is producing a chemical that would inhibit the growth, दूसरे की growth को अगर ये रोक रहा है, तो that would obviously be a negative effect. And most allelopathy is like this only. It inhibits the growth of other plants, right? Okay. It may also produce some positive effects, but that is rare. So the examples of allelopathy, जो हमने black walnut tree का जगलोन chemical पढ़ा था, right? We had just read that कि black walnut trees are producing a chemical called jaglone, which is inhibiting the growth of other plants. That is also allelopathy. So amencilism का भी example था वो, because black walnut plant was not being affected, but the plant in its vicinity was getting a negative impact. So it is an example of allelopathy. It is also an example of amencilism. Okay. Now, sunflowers, they release certain chemicals called allelochemicals, which can inhibit the growth of other plants growing nearby. So nearby जो भी plants हैं, उनको भी inhibit कर सकते हैं sunflower. Same, they are called allelochemicals only. So you just have to remember that sunflowers do allelopathy. Similarly, eucalyptus plant. Eucalyptus is the plant through which paper is derived. So eucalyptus plant can also do the process of allelopathy. Allelopathy समझ आ गया? मतलब certain chemical is released जो दूसरे plants को vicinity में impact करे. अब इसका फायदा क्या हुआ? Why are plants inhibiting the growth of other plants in their vicinity? सोचो, क्यों कर रहे हैं वो inhibit? क्या जरूरत है साइड वाले प्लांट को इनहिबिट करने की इस प्लांट को? What is the advantage of allelopathy? Think about that. Exactly. They are out competing the other plants. जो आसपास उनके plants हैं, they have the same niche, they have the same requirement, the same resource utilization. So if you do allelopathy, beyond a point, if you kill too many plants around you, let's say sunflower, you grow it in a field, it's able to kill the weeds around it. In that case, it can outcompete the weeds. It can kill the weeds and get access to the resources. So this could be a benefit of allelopathy. So allelopathy amencilism है, या parasitism है, या predation है, या competition है. This depends on what is happening in the environment. So these biotic interactions, they are not static, right? They depend on what the environmental conditions are like. Okay. Allelopathy का word breakdown कोई कह रहा था, allelo would be meaning a particular chemical that they are producing, and pathy is just the production and impact on the other, right? जैसे अगर if you read homeopathy, that is the impact of homeotic chemicals or chemicals that are normally there in our surrounding, something that is not considered very different from us. So the name homeo, and pathy, the impact of that chemical on your body. So that is the example of allelopathy, production of chemicals that impact the things in our surroundings. Okay, the last biotic interaction we have to read is neutralism. Now neutralism कैसे होता है? This is not very clear to anybody, right? It is a very different type of interaction, so nobody knows how it happens, but it is basically two species inhabiting the same space, using the same resources, but still having no effect on each other. So neutralism is 0-0. So both have no impact on each other, right? How it happens is not very clear to us, but in some cases there is neutralism, that there are two species, they are having the same resources, same place of stay, but still they don't impact each other, right? So it is sometimes there that the cost and benefits of each partner are exactly the same, so that the sum gets to 0. You don't need to know this in detail. If you just know what neutralism means, that both are living in the same space, but they're not impacting each other. This is the idea of neutralism. Now, let us now come to the next concept, which is ecosystem productivity. Okay, अब रिमेंबर करो, जब हम कल पढ़ रहे थे हमने इकोसिस्टम में पढ़ा था देयर विल बी न्यूट्रिएंट साइक्लिंग, देयर विल बी एनर्जी प्रोडक्शन, देयर विल बी इंटरेक्शन एंड देयर विल बी प्रोडक्टिविटी। हमने इंटरेक्शन पढ़ लिया, हमने एनर्जी प्रोडक्शन एंड एनर्जी फ्लो पढ़ लिया है। नाउ वी आर गोइंग टू रीड प्रोडक्टिविटी एंड देन वी आर गोइंग टू रीड न्यूट्रिएंट साइक्लिंग इन एन इकोसिस्टम। ओके, नाउ in ecosystem productivity what is happening is it is the biomass generation or stored energy in an ecosystem per unit area per unit time। मतलब बायोमास का क्या मतलब था? बायोमास वी हैड रेड यस्टरडे, बायोमास मींस ड्राई वेट, राइट? सो कितना बायोमास वो जनरेट कर सकता है, आपने देखा था दैट जितनी भी एनर्जी उसके पास होगी ओनली 10% ऑफ दैट वुड बी यूज्ड फॉर जनरेशन ऑफ बायोमास। तो इन अ पर्टिकुलर इकोसिस्टम, in a particular ecosystem, like let's say in a lake or in a wetland or let's say in a tropical rainforest or in a temperate rainforest, what is the biomass generation ability of the entire ecosystem per unit area per unit time? So let's say how many grams of biomass can be generated in 1 meter square of that ecosystem in 1 year's time, or how many kilocalorie of energy can be generated in 1 meter square in 1 year's time. This is the unit of ecosystem productivity, and the idea is generation of certain energy or the generation of biomass per unit area per unit time. Biomass ही जो होता है that is the thing that gets stored as energy, and we have already read the law of biomass storage which is 10%. However much energy is available, only 10% of that can be stored as biomass. Okay. अब इकोसिस्टम प्रोडक्टिविटी को हम दो पार्ट्स में डिवाइड करते हैं। पहले हम बात करते हैं प्राइमरी प्रोडक्टिविटी। ओके, नाउ प्राइमरी प्रोडक्टिविटी इज द प्रोडक्टिविटी ऑफ प्राइमरी प्रोड्यूसर्स, जो सन से प्रोड्यूस करते हैं, राइट? प्राइमरी प्रोड्यूसर्स की जो प्रोडक्टिविटी है एक इकोसिस्टम में, दैट वुड बी प्राइमरी प्रोडक्टिविटी। ऑफ कोर्स जो कंज्यूमर्स होंगे, जैसे हम लोग हैं, we are also producing some biomass, so we also have some productivity that will always be less than this, right, because of 10% law, but उसकी भी प्रोडक्टिविटी जो होगी उसे हम कहेंगे सेकेंडरी प्रोडक्टिविटी। सो सेकेंडरी प्रोडक्टिविटी इज द वन डन बाय कंज्यूमर्स, प्राइमरी प्रोडक्टिविटी इज द वन डन बाय प्राइमरी प्रोड्यूसर्स, जो सनलाइट से फोटोसिंथेसिस करके बायोमास प्रोड्यूस कर रहे हैं, दैट इज प्राइमरी प्रोडक्टिविटी। जो कंज्यूमर्स लाइक यू एंड मी कर रहे हैं, दैट वुड बी कॉल्ड सेकेंडरी प्रोडक्टिविटी। Now in primary productivity there are two types. One is gross primary productivity and one is net primary productivity. ये बात इकोनॉमिक्स के लिए भी या कहीं भी आप याद कर लो कि for anything to become net, right, आपको gross से कुछ subtract करना पड़ा होगा। Whatever is the gross, gross means the whole, the huge, the big, and the net means the actual that you need to realize or the actual that you need to study. जैसे there is gross domestic product and net domestic product, right? Then there is national income. तो उसमें हम क्या करते हैं, जीडीपी से कुछ subtract करते हैं। So similarly from gross we would be subtracting something to get to net. Now what is gross? Gross is the complete production of organic matter during photosynthesis. Gross primary productivity, photosynthesis में जितना भी organic matter, जितना भी C6H12 O6 यही कल प्रोड्यूस हो रहा था, हमने देखा था फोटोसिंथेसिस में, whatever amount of this gets produced in productivity, the whole amount would be called the gross primary productivity. अब इसकी बात देखो, the other one is called net primary productivity. net में हम क्या करेंगे, जो भी gross primary productivity है उससे हम respiration loss हटा देंगे। we will subtract the losses that would have happened in respiration. बिकॉज जब फोटोसिंथेसिस से प्लांट ने ये प्रोड्यूस किया होगा, व्हेन इट वुड हैव प्रोड्यूस्ड दिस ग्लूकोज, सम ऑफ द ग्लूकोज वुड हैव बीन यूटिलाइज्ड इन द प्रोसेस ऑफ रेस्पिरेशन टू प्रोड्यूस एनर्जी, राइट? तो रेस्पिरेशन में जो ये बायोमास का लॉस हुआ, राइट, उसको हटा के वी विल गो टू नेट प्राइमरी प्रोडक्टिविटी। ओके, सो देयर इज ग्रॉस प्राइमरी प्रोडक्टिविटी एंड इफ यू सब्ट्रैक्ट रेस्पिरेशन लॉसेस इट बिकम्स नेट प्राइमरी प्रोडक्टिविटी। Second thing is secondary productivity. This is the productivity of a consumer. एक consumer किस लेवल पे बायोमास प्रोड्यूस करता है, that is called secondary productivity. Now, हमने कल ये देखा था that 1% of the energy from the sun gets produced into photosynthesis to get food or biomass, right? लेकिन फिर भी despite that we saw कि भाई 1% भी सनलाइट का बहुत ज्यादा है, राइट. 1% इज ऑल्सो ह्यूज एंड दैट इज वाई द नेट प्राइमरी प्रोडक्टिविटी ऑफ द होल बायोस्फीयर, the living organisms in the world, is 170 billion tons. 170 billion tons is the net primary productivity of the whole biosphere, even though it is just 1% of what the sun is giving us. Okay. Now, अगर हम oceans और land को compare करें, तो land पे जो primary productivity है, it is much more than that of oceans. Oceans का 32% contribution है और land का 68% contribution है. ऐसा क्यों है, हम अभी देखते हैं. राइट. अब हम कैसे चेक करें इन इकोसिस्टम प्रोडक्टिविटी कि किस जगह की, किस इकोसिस्टम की प्रोडक्टिविटी ज्यादा होगी और किस इकोसिस्टम की प्रोडक्टिविटी कम होगी. क्या लेक की प्रोडक्टिविटी ज्यादा होगी या ट्रॉपिकल ग्रासलैंड की ज्यादा होगी, क्या ट्रॉपिकल ग्रासलैंड की ज्यादा होगी या मैंग्रोव की ज्यादा होगी. हाउ डू वी चेक दैट? टू चेक दैट देयर आर सर्टेन प्रिंसिपल्स. देखो, वेयर इज द प्राइमरी प्रोडक्टिविटी कमिंग फ्रॉम? इट इज कमिंग फ्रॉम सनलाइट, राइट. सनलाइट से ही फोटोसिंथेसिस होके प्रोडक्टिविटी हो रही है. So if a particular ecosystem gets more access to sunlight, उसे better sunlight मिलती है, वो better photosynthesis कर पाता है, तो उसकी primary productivity ज्यादा होगी. This much is, I think, pretty obvious. If an ecosystem gets more access to sunlight, it is going to have better primary productivity. Now let's see. First comparison is lower versus higher latitudes. So in the lower latitudes, right? अगर हम lower latitudes की बात करें, मतलब if this is the earth, so close to the equator, of course the productivity is going to be more because the sunlight is going to be more as compared to the higher latitudes. अगर आर्कटिक में देखें तो सनलाइट कम आएगी, right? So more sunlight is there in the tropics, that is why lower latitudes के ecosystems are going to have higher productivity. Second, lower altitude. मान लो अगर हमें ऐसे एक माउंटेन देखें तो on a mountain, of course here the amount of sunlight access is going to be lower as compared to here. So at lower altitude, the productivity is going to be more. If there are two ecosystems, one here and one here, the one that is here will have more access to sunlight, so it will have more productivity. So इससे हमें क्या पता चल रहा है? Obviously, sunlight is an important factor because this is what leads to the process of photosynthesis, and it is photosynthesis that leads to productivity. ठीक है? Okay. Now, if we compare continents and oceans in terms of productivity, किसका ज्यादा होगा? देखो, ocean is bigger, है ना? Ocean is much bigger than the continent. Continent की अगर मैं बात करूं, this is the continent, यहां sunlight आ रही है और यहीं पे plants उग रहे हैं. But in an ocean there is depth, right? तो sunlight reaches only the top 400 meters. उसके नीचे बहुत कम sunlight पहुंचती है, right? तो ocean में ओवरऑल हो सकता है कि प्रोडक्टिविटी ज्यादा हो रही हो, ज्यादा प्रोडक्शन हो रही हो, बट व्हाट डिड वी सी? दैट प्रोडक्टिविटी इज पर यूनिट एरिया. अब ओशन का एरिया बहुत ज्यादा है, ओवरऑल प्रोडक्टिविटी भी हो सकता है ज्यादा हो, बट द एरिया इज अ लॉट एंड बियॉन्ड 400 meters sunlight does not reach. So in a ocean the productivity, because it is per unit area, in an ocean it is lesser than that of a continent because continent में area होगा कम, we will just count this much, but in an ocean we will count the depth also, we will count the entire area, right? So because of this entire area being counted, the productivity of an ocean is generally less than that of a continent. Now next, Arctic और Antarctic को अगर हम compare करें, so Arctic has more productivity. This is due to a phenomena called Arctic amplification. Arctic generally gets more sunlight and Arctic is also warmer than the Antarctic because of a phenomena called Arctic amplification. When we read climate change, then we are going to read this phenomena of Arctic amplification. Basically it means कि Arctic areas में जो temperature rise है, it is much more than the other parts of the planet because of certain interactions. So Arctic की productivity is more than Antarctic की productivity. Now how do you measure the net primary productivity? You measure the biomass. Biomass, how do we measure? We measure the dry weight. Why are we measuring the dry weight and not the full weight? Because जो water का impact है, water is seasonal. कभी कभी plants में during winter water ज्यादा होता है, during summer water कम होता है, sorry, during summer water ज्यादा store होता है, during winter they lose their water, right? So this water is actually a seasonal quantity, or I should rather put it as moisture. Moisture that is there in the plant is a seasonal quantity. तो वो प्लांट ने खुद नहीं प्रोड्यूस किया, इट डिपेंड्स ऑन द एनवायरमेंट। तो जो हम मेजर करते हैं दैट इज कॉल्ड ड्राई वेट। ओके, वी मेजर द ड्राई वेट और द बायोमास एंड हाउ डू वी मेजर इट? यूनिट एरिया पर यूनिट टाइम। Okay, this is the idea of ecosystem productivity. Okay, now let's see some ecosystem productivity के important regions. What would be the higher productivity regions? Of course, regions that are ecotones, right? अब कल की क्लास याद करो, where there is edge effect, these regions are going to have high productivity. Where there are ecotones, where there is edge effect, two ecosystems are combining and there is greater diversity, there is greater presence of species, there are development of new species, there is edge effect. तो वहां पे estuaries, wetlands, mangroves, coral reefs, these places are going to have higher productivity. Of course, tropical forests are also going to have higher productivity. Why? Because in the tropical regions there is access to sunlight throughout the year. Throughout the year there is sunlight in the tropical regions, so these are going to have higher productivity. Now, if we come to medium productivity, slightly lower than this, you can see temperate forests, grasslands. अब obviously अगर आप grassland और tropical forest को compare करो, you would understand कि grassland की प्राइम जो productivity है वो कम है। Tropical forest में कैसे है biomass? In the form of trees, huge, and grasslands में it is grasses. तो grasses की जो productivity है, the biomass that they have is obviously lesser, right? ग्रासलैंड्स में भी ट्रॉपिकल और टेम्परेट ग्रासलैंड को अगर हम कंपेयर करेंगे तो ट्रॉपिकल ग्रासलैंड में ज्यादा होगी, ट्रॉपिकल विल बी मोर देन द टेम्परेट, बिकॉज ट्रॉपिकल में अगेन देयर इज बेटर एक्सेस टू सनलाइट। ओके, नाउ अगर हम सवाना और स्टेपी को कंपेयर करें, इफ वी कंपेयर सवाना एंड स्टेपीज, सवाना हैज मोर प्रोडक्टिविटी। व्हाई? यू विल टेल मी। लेट्स सी हाउ मच यू नो बायोम्स। सवाना हैज मोर प्रोडक्टिविटी। सवाना कहां लोकेटेड होता है वर्ल्ड में और स्टेपी कहां लोकेटेड होता है वर्ल्ड में, इससे आप याद करके ये आराम से ये लोकेशन डिराइव कर सकते हो। इसीलिए आई टोल्ड यू यस्टरडे आल्सो दैट व्हेन यू आर डूइंग दिस, व्हेन यू आर स्टडीइंग दिस, गो टू जीसी लियोंग एंड स्टडी द आइडिया ऑफ बायोम्स। ठीक है, बायोम्स पढ़ लो फ्रॉम जीसी लियोंग। ओके, दैट वुड हेल्प यू अ लॉट। ओके, नाउ व्हाट आर द लो प्रोडक्टिविटी रीजन्स? ऑफ कोर्स डेजर्ट, परमाफ्रॉस्ट, माउंटेन पीक्स, आर्कटिक एंड एंटार्क्टिक, ये ऑब्वियसली लो रीजन्स होंगे, लो रीजन्स ऑफ प्रोडक्टिविटी। ट्रॉपिकल रेन फॉरेस्ट कॉन्ट्रीब्यूट 22% ऑफ द टोटल एनपीपी एंड ओशन कॉन्ट्रीब्यूट्स अबाउट 24%। बट जब हम मेजरमेंट करते हैं, ये तो पूरी की बात हो रही है, व्हेन वी डू मेजरमेंट वी डू पर यूनिट एरिया। ओशन का एरिया बहुत ज्यादा है एज कंपेयर टू ट्रॉपिकल रेन फॉरेस्ट, तो प्रोडक्टिविटी ऑफ ट्रॉपिकल रेन फॉरेस्ट इज मच हायर। ओके, ओवरऑल टेरेस्ट्रियल इकोसिस्टम्स मतलब लैंड पे जो अर्थ की प्रोडक्टिविटी है उसका 66 to 68% है, और जो सी है, सी पे इट इज अबाउट 34%। आर्कटिक मोर देन एंटार्क्टिक, आई हैव ऑलरेडी एक्सप्लेन टू यू बिकॉज ऑफ द फिनोमिना ऑफ आर्कटिक एम्प्लीफिकेशन। नाउ दिस इज अ टेबल ऑफ बेसिकली कौन से एरिया की कितनी प्रोडक्टिविटी है। देखो, आपको ऑब्वियसली यह पूरा टेबल याद नहीं होगा, बट जो प्रिंसिपल्स हैं कि एज इफेक्ट जहां पे है वहां पे प्रोडक्टिविटी ज्यादा है, वहां पे सनलाइट ज्यादा है वहां पे प्रोडक्टिविटी ज्यादा है, वेयर देयर इज लेस सनलाइट और देयर इज लेस एक्सेस टू सनलाइट और द एरिया इज मोर लाइक एन ओशन, वहां पे प्रोडक्टिविटी कम है। यूजिंग दैट यू कैन मेक एन एस्टिमेशन, बट स्टिल आई वुड रेकमेंड दैट थ्रू द स्लाइड्स जस्ट रीड दिस वंस। देखिए, जैसे मैं आपको एक दो रीड करके दिखाता हूं। ट्रॉपिकल फॉरेस्ट की प्रोडक्टिविटी इज कैलकुलेटेड एट 2000 grams per meter square per year. Okay. Similarly, temperate forest की 1300. Obviously, temperate forest की कम है, right? Coral reef and estuaries. Coral reef and estuary में क्या हो रहा है? There is edge effect, so it is also at 2000. Savanna is at 700, while temperate grassland is at 500. So you can know what this means. Savanna and steppe का अगर आपने पढ़ा है, you will understand that, right? अगर हम पूरे ओवरऑल अर्थ की देखें, ओवरऑल अर्थ की एवरेज वैल्यू इज बिटवीन 320 एंड 340। अगर मैं पूरे अर्थ की वैल्यू देखूं तो द एवरेज वैल्यू फॉर द एंटायर अर्थ इज बिटवीन 320 एंड 340। टेरेस्ट्रियल इकोसिस्टम्स की वैल्यू इज अबाउट 730 एंड मरीन की इज अबाउट 155। क्योंकि मरीन में एरिया ज्यादा है तो यहां पे द वैल्यू वुड बी लेसर बिकॉज वी आर मेजरिंग पर यूनिट एरिया, राइट? जहां इकोटोन एरियाज हैं, दे आर जनरली more productive, higher productive, of course due to the presence of edge effect. अब जैसे swamp and marshes, these are both ecotone areas, so you look at the average NPV 2000. If you look at a lake, it is only 500. यहाँ पे सबकी वैल्यूज दी हुई हैं. I would recommend that you just read them once, तो आपको एक बेसिक आइडिया हो जाए. आपको बस ये याद करना है कि किसकी किससे ज्यादा है. You don't have to remember the exact values or numbers. Okay, this is the same graph. Again, here the name of the ecosystem is written and here the productivity is shown. So just read this once just to get an idea. Right. Now let us see the concept of ecosystem collapse. देखो, it is a phenomena where ecosystem rapidly lose their structure and function. Ecosystem का एक structure है, उसके कुछ functions हैं, जैसे tropical rainforest is one ecosystem, tundra is one ecosystem, marshes are one ecosystem, mangroves are one ecosystem. In ecosystems की there are some structures and there are certain functions. But मान लो there is some disaster, there is some problem, some human disaster, some natural disaster, जिसकी वजह से ये इकोसिस्टम कोलैप्स हो जाए, राइट, जिसकी वजह से ये अपना स्ट्रक्चर, फंक्शन, अपनी इंटरेक्शंस लूज कर दे. अब यहां पे आपको याद क्या करना है, और जो आप एमसीक्यू में गलत करके आओगे, दैट दीज लॉसेस ऑफ स्ट्रक्चर एंड फंक्शन टेंड टू सिंप्लीफाई द इकोसिस्टम, राइट, टेंड टू सिंप्लीफाई द इकोसिस्टम. ये चीज हम जनरली गलत मार्क करते हैं. इट विल होमोजेनाइज द इकोसिस्टम. होमोजेनाइज मींस मेक इट मोर सिमिलर थ्रू आउट. अब इसको आपने रिलेट करना है थ्रू द कॉन्सेप्ट ऑफ फूड वेब. अगर हम फूड वेब याद कर रहे थे तो फूड वेब में हमने क्या देखा था, इन अ फूड वेब इफ देयर इज मोर कंप्लेक्सिटी, राइट, देयर इज मोर स्टेबिलिटी. इन अ इकोसिस्टम इफ देयर इज कोलैप्स इट वुड लीड टू सिंप्लीफिकेशन, मींस द स्टेबिलिटी ऑफ द इकोसिस्टम वुड गो डाउन. एंड कोलैप्स तभी होता है when there is a catastrophic decline of the carrying capacity. Now what carrying capacity means I'll just tell you, but first you need to remember that an ecosystem collapses, उसकी interactions खत्म हो जाए, उसकी आपस में जो उसका system है वो it gets ruined because of some natural or artificial disaster. It would lead to homogenization and simplification of the ecosystem. Now we have to understand the concept of carrying capacity. What does this word mean? Carrying capacity. See, every ecosystem has certain ability. जैसे मान लो एक मैंग्रोव है, right? Yeah, let's say there is a tropical grassland. Okay, let's say there is a tropical grassland. Now in this tropical grassland there are going to be certain trees, certain grasses. These grasses and trees will be fed on by certain herbivores. These herbivores will then be eaten by certain carnivores. है ना, ऐसा ही हो रहा होगा कुछ. नाउ जो इसके ट्रीज या ग्रासेस हैं, जो इसके ट्रीज या ग्रासेस हैं, उनकी एक एबिलिटी है, वो एक सर्टेन नंबर ऑफ हर्बीवोर्स को ही सस्टेन कर सकते हैं. 10 करोड़ हर्बीवोर आ जाएंगे तो वो सस्टेन नहीं कर पाएंगे. सो दे हैव अ सर्टेन नंबर, लेट्स कॉल दैट नंबर एक्स. वो एक्स नंबर ऑफ हर्बीवोर्स को सस्टेन कर सकते हैं, सस्टेनेबल रह सकते हैं उनके साथ, कि भाई इनका जो ग्रोथ है, ऐसा भी ना हो कि हर्बीवोर बहुत ज्यादा हो, वो एक बारी में सारे ट्रीज और ग्रासेस को खा जाएं और पता चले कि कोई बचा ही नहीं, राइट. और ऐसा भी ना हो कि हर्बीवोर्स इतने कम है कि ट्रीज एंड ग्रासेस आर केप्ट ऑन ग्रोइंग, दे केप्ट ऑन ग्रोइंग. सो देयर इज अ सर्टेन नंबर, एन ऑप्टिमल नंबर एक्स ऑफ हर्बीवोर्स दैट आर देयर इन दिस इकोसिस्टम. दिस एक्स और ऑप्टिमल नंबर इज द कैरिंग कैपेसिटी, कि कितने हर्बीवोर्स को ये ट्रीज एंड ग्रासेस सस्टेन कर सकता है. सिमिलरली देयर विल बी अ नंबर फॉर कार्निवोर्स, लेट्स से वाई. जितने भी हर्बीवोर्स हैं उनकी जो ग्रोथ है, मान लो वो हर साल 10 नए हर्बीवोर ऐड करते हैं, तो अगर कार्निवोर हर साल 5 या 6 नए हर्बीवोर खाएंगे तो बात बनी रहेगी. बट अगर हर साल कार्निवोर 15 नए हर्बीवोर खा जाएंगे तो soon the population of herbivores will decline. As soon as the population of herbivores decline, the carnivores will not have anything to eat and even their population will decline. So एक optimal number है हर level पे. This optimal number that the ecosystem can sustainably carry, the optimal number that the ecosystem can sustainably carry is the idea of carrying capacity. Carrying capacity. Now if the ecosystem gets destroyed, कोई disaster हो जाए, कोई earthquake आ जाए, forest fire लग जाए, तो उससे क्या होगा, ecosystem की carrying capacity कम हो जाएगी. पहले there were 10,000 trees. Due to forest fire, only 500 trees are left. So the amount of herbivores it can sustain will go down. Then the number of herbivores go down, the number of carnivores it can sustain will also go down. So the carrying capacity of the ecosystem will decline due to certain particular disaster. This decline, a catastrophic decline in the carrying capacity would be called an ecosystem collapse. Okay. Now क्या होगा इससे? It can pose a threat of mass extinction. हो सकता है कि बहुत सारे एनिमल्स, बहुत सारे प्लांट्स एकदम से एक्सटिंक्ट हो जाएं बिकॉज देयर इज अ ह्यूज डिक्लाइन इन द carrying capacity. It can also pose a threat to human populations because humans are also dependent on the ecosystem for food, for provisioning, for regulation, etc. etc. किस किस चीजों के लिए हम इकोसिस्टम पे डिपेंडेंट है? We will see in today's class only. Okay, all right. जैसे ऑस्ट्रेलिया में there was this forest fire in 2019-20. This was an example of ecosystem collapse. The American Dust Bowl, where there was a huge dust storm and many trees died. That is also an example of ecosystem collapse and the fall of the carrying capacity of an ecosystem. Okay, all right. Now, next thing that we have to read is ecological succession here, but here I'll just give you a break for 2 minutes. I'll also have some water. Just take a break for 2 minutes, see what we've done already. Then we'll see the concept of ecological succession. After ecological succession, we are going to do biogeochemical cycle. Okay, there is some work or drilling that needs to happen here. So that's why we're just taking a break for 2 minutes. So I'll just put a timer here for the next 2 minutes. I hope that happens and then we can continue soon. So I'll just put a timer for 3 minutes. We'll continue then from ecological succession. Okay, let's continue. All right. ओके, देखो, नाउ लेट्स रीड अबाउट इकोलॉजिकल सक्सेशन. देखो, होता क्या है कि जब कोई कम्युनिटी है, right? अगर वी नो ऑलरेडी व्हाट अ कम्युनिटी इज, जब कोई कम्युनिटी है तो उसका जो कॉम्पोजिशन है और उसका जो स्ट्रक्चर है दैट इज कॉन्स्टेंटली चेंजिंग एंड इवॉल्विंग इन रिस्पॉन्स टू द एनवायरमेंट अराउंड इट. अगर आसपास की एनवायरमेंट चेंज हो जाएगी तो कम्युनिटी विल ऑल्सो चेंज, राइट? सो व्हाट इज इकोलॉजिकल सक्सेशन? इट इज अ ग्रेजुअल and predictable change in the species composition of a given area, right? हमने देखा था community was group of species, तो because of the environment changing around it, उस environment change की वजह से क्या predictable और gradual changes होते हैं in a level in the species composition, that is what is called an ecological succession. Now during succession some species colonize an area, कुछ नए species आते हैं, कुछ species की population बढ़ती है, कुछ स्पीशीज की पॉपुलेशन घटती है. दिस राइज ऑफ पॉपुलेशन, फॉल ऑफ पॉपुलेशन, दिस इज व्हाट इज द आइडिया ऑफ इकोलॉजिकल सक्सेशन. नाउ दीज चेंजेस आर ग्रेजुअल, धीरे धीरे होते हैं, दे डोंट हैपन सडनली एंड दे आर फेयरली प्रिडिक्टेबल. ओके, मतलब उन्हें प्रिडिक्ट किया जा सकता है, राइट? So this gradual and fairly predictable change is what is called ecological succession. Now these changes will finally lead to a community that is in equilibrium with the current environment. मतलब फाइनली एक ऐसी कम्युनिटी बन जाएगी, एक ऐसे सेट ऑफ स्पीशीज बन जाएंगे जो इस करंट एनवायरनमेंट के साथ इक्विलिब्रियम में है. मतलब उनकी पॉपुलेशंस भी स्टेबलाइज हो जाएंगे, उनका नंबर भी स्टेबलाइज हो जाएगा. जब तक कोई ड्रास्टिक चेंज नहीं आएगा एनवायरनमेंट में, एक इक्विलिब्रियम एस्टैब्लिश्ड रहेगा. तो पहले द community will reach to that equilibrium level. After that equilibrium is reached with the environment, जब तक environment में कोई drastic change नहीं आता तब तक यहां पे भी कोई drastic change नहीं आएगा. हमने natural selection का example भी पहले देखा है. Similar thing is happening here. जब तक nature around it will stay constant, जब तक environment around will stay constant, तब तक there will be an equilibrium. So what happens in succession? वो देखते हैं. एक के बाद एक there is going to be a different set of species that is going to form. एक के बाद एक there is going to be a different set because the environment will keep changing. Finally जाके वो एक stable environment बन जाएगी. When the environment becomes stable, the species composition or the community will also become stable. तो ये जो sequence of communities हैं, पहले एक community, फिर B, फिर C, फिर D, फिर E, फिर F. Then let's say F is the one which is in equilibrium with the environment. तो ये जो entire sequence है, इनको कहते हैं हम SER, S-E-R-E, SER. And there are several communities. ये जो individual transition communities हैं, they are called seral communities. Again derived from this word SER. So पहले there will be primary species, the first one that will come in an area. पहले मानते हैं कि एक एरिया है जहां पे कोई भी स्पीशीज एग्जिस्ट नहीं करती. वहां पे द फर्स्ट स्पीशीज विल कम कॉल्ड द प्राइमरी स्पीशीज, ऑल्सो नोन एज द पायनियर स्पीशीज. जब वो पायनियर स्पीशीज वहां आ जाएंगे, जब एक ऐसा एरिया था जहां पे कोई भी स्पीशीज एग्जिस्ट नहीं करती थी, लेट्स से देयर वाज जस्ट अ बैरन रॉक, यहां पे पहले कुछ स्पीशीज आए, दे वर कॉल्ड पायनियर स्पीशीज. नाउ दीज पायनियर स्पीशीज चेंज द एनवायरनमेंट अ लिटिल बिट. उन्होंने एनवायरनमेंट को चेंज किया. लेट्स से उन्होंने सॉइल फॉर्मेशन स्टार्ट कर दी, उन्होंने रॉक को ब्रेक डाउन करना स्टार्ट कर दिया. देन प्लांट्स विल स्टार्ट ग्रोइंग. अब जैसे ही प्लांट्स स्टार्टेड ग्रोइंग, तो बीज, बैट्स, certain other pollinators, they started coming. When they started coming, it was seen that birds could also start coming to feed on them. When birds came, then hawks came. Now when these plants were growing, also some herbivores came. जब herbivore आ गए, then some carnivores came. तो ये एक के बाद एक there will be changes in the species composition. These changes one after the other will be called seral communities. And finally एक ऐसी स्टेज आएगी जिसमें एक certain number of carnivores होगा, certain number of herbivores होगा, certain number of plants होगा. That final stage, which is in equilibrium with the environment, that final stage is called a climax community. The final community which is in equilibrium with the environment. Now, ecological succession. Succession का क्या मतलब है? Word breakdown भी करके देखते हैं. Succession means in successive stages what is happening. First stage में क्या, फिर second stage में क्या, फिर third stage में क्या. So if this succession is happening, right? एक के बाद एक there is change. So this succession would finally lead to a community that is in equilibrium with its environment. Now, if I say primary succession would be an area जहां पे पहले there was no living organism, कोई भी लिविंग ऑर्गेनिज्म वहां पे एग्जिस्ट नहीं करता था. जैसे मान लो एक वोल्केनिक इरप्शन होके एक नया लावा बना और लावा देन कूल डाउन टू फॉर्म रॉक. At that time there is no living organism there. From there, how it will lead to the final stage that would be called primary succession. Now what would be secondary succession? Secondary succession would be, let's say there was a forest. Forest was in equilibrium. वहां पे everybody was living and everything was normal. But a huge forest fire happened, or let's say a huge earthquake happened. All the trees fell down because of that earthquake. All the trees died. So since the trees died, the herbivores died. The herbivores died, so the carnivores died. So something happened, and this natural biotic community that was living in equilibrium, all of them died, right? So that would be the example of a secondary succession. कि पहले community was there, it was normal, but due to some, let's say, flood, forest fire, due to some human disaster, natural disaster, all of them died. So now again they have to start from zero and reach the climax stage. So that would be secondary succession, where already something had existed before. Primary succession would be where nothing had existed before. Okay, all right. So primary succession can happen where? It can happen where there is newly cooled lava, where there is bare rock, newly created ponds, establishment of new biotic community, and this new biotic community establishment is happening in a place जहां पर पहले there was no living organism, where there was no living place, no biotic community, वहां पर एक नई establishment हो रही है. So for this new biotic community to get established in the process of primary succession, there needs to be the formation of soil. पहले वहां पे soil बननी जरूरी है. Soil बनेगी तो plants आएंगे, plants आएंगे तो herbivore आएंगे, herbivore आएंगे तो carnivore आएंगे. The environment will keep changing, and then the species or the community composition will also keep changing. तो primary succession होती है उन areas में. Primary succession happens in those areas where a new biotic community is forming, and first you need the formation of soil. So depending on the climatic conditions, soil formation can take many years. जहां भी हो रहा हो, अगर वहां पे tropical region है तो soil formation will happen slightly faster. If it is a cold region, soil formation will happen slightly slower. अब here, when you are reading this today, go back home and revise pedogenesis from geography NCERT. कि soil के layers क्या होते हैं, how does soil form, this is in the geography NCERT. This you need to revise because this is linked. Now, depending on the climatic conditions, soil formation can take many years. This is soil formation will happen where? In primary succession, जहां पे कोई soil नहीं थी, कोई living organism नहीं था. But अगर आप secondary succession का example देखो, secondary succession was happening जहां पहले living organisms रहते थे. मान लो forest fire होके सारे trees मर गए, but soil तो बन चुकी है ना. So some soil is already present. So secondary succession is faster. Secondary succession is faster than the process of primary succession because थोड़ी सी soil already exists. Now as the succession is proceeding, it is possible. मान लो एक से next stage बनती जा रही है, A से B, B से C, C से D, ऐसे बनता जा रहा है. It is possible that some interruption by humans, some disaster, C stage पे वो पहुंच गया था. It was going forward. बट यहां पे कोई ह्यूमन डिजास्टर हो गया, नेचुरल डिजास्टर हो गया, एंड इट गेट्स रिवर्टेड बैक टू बी स्टेज. तो दिस इज आल्सो पॉसिबल. तो ये एक डायनामिक प्रोसेस है, कैसे चलता रहेगा. जब जैसी एनवायरनमेंट चेंज होगी, एनवायरनमेंट आगे वाली स्टेज के लिए भी चेंज हो सकती है कि सब कुछ नॉर्मली प्रोग्रेस करता गया, और एनवायरनमेंट पीछे वाली स्टेज के लिए भी चेंज हो सकती है. मान लो कोई डिजास्टर फिर से आ गया. तो दिस इज व्हाट द आइडिया ऑफ सक्सेशन इज. इट इज सक्सेसिवली चेंजिंग स्टेजेस इन रिस्पॉन्स टू द एनवायरनमेंट. नाउ अगर हम प्लांट्स में सक्सेशन देखें, तो अगर कोई वेट एरिया है, मान लो वेट एरिया मींस लेट्स से देयर इज मरीन इकोसिस्टम और लेक इकोसिस्टम, वहां से जो उसे हम कहेंगे हाइड्रार्क सक्सेशन. हाइड्रार्क, अगेन यू कैन सी द वर्ड वेट और वाटर बीइंग हियर. हाइड्रार्क और वेट सक्सेशन जो होगी, फाइनली इट विल लीड टू अ मेसिक कम्युनिटी. व्हाट इज मेसिक, आई टेल यू. एंड अगर कोई बहुत ड्राई एरिया है, मान लो देयर इज अ ड्राई एरिया, इट इज कॉल्ड ज़ीरार्क. This word zero at the end, Xero. This generally means dry. Xerophytes, plants that live in dry areas. Okay. So there is xerarch succession that will also finally lead to mesic succession, or mesic condition. अगर बहुत ज्यादा वेट से स्टार्ट हो गए तो भी जो वहां पे प्लांट्स ग्रो करेंगे जैसे होगा, फाइनली इट विल लीड टू अ मेसिक कम्युनिटी. मेसिक मींस मीडियम, नॉट टू ड्राई, नॉट टू वेट. Similar for Xerac, if you start from a completely dry thing, that also will finally lead to a mesic community. So the final conditions that come after succession are the same. The final conditions are the same. They are called mesic, medium water conditions. दिखाता हूं ये कैसे होता है, राइट? जैसे मान लो कोई ड्राई कंडीशन है, जैसे कि बेयर रॉक. बेयर रॉक इज देयर. यहां पर पहले क्या होगा? सॉइल फॉर्मेशन. Small soil formation के बाद there will be small plants coming. After small plants there will be some grasses that are growing. Grass grow होने के बाद there will be growth of those grasses further. Shrubs will grow, small trees will grow, and finally it will lead to a forest. This forest is the climax community if you start from a completely dry thing. So from a dry thing you will reach here to a forest. This is mesic. It is neither too wet, neither too dry. Similar example अगर मैं pond में देखूं, पॉन्ड में क्या होता है? पहले दे विल बी द ग्रोथ ऑफ फाइटोप्लैंक्टन. कल हमने देखा था व्हाट फाइटोप्लैंक्टन आर. फिर थोड़े थोड़े प्लांट्स ग्रो करना स्टार्ट करेंगे. देन सम मोर प्लांट्स विल डेवलप दैट आर रूटेड, दैट हैव रूट्स, एंड दे विल डिपॉजिट मोर एंड मोर सॉइल हियर. देन फर्दर ग्रोथ ऑफ दीज प्लांट्स एंड सॉइल्स विल फॉर्म. देन लेटर अगेन अ स्मॉल फॉरेस्ट एंड देन फाइनली अ थिक फॉरेस्ट. सो इफ यू स्टार्ट फ्रॉम देयर एंड यू लेट सक्सेशन प्रोसीड नेचुरली, आप कोई इंटरफेरेंस मत करो और नेचुरली सक्सेशन को चलने दो. एंड यहां से भी आप बिल्कुल ड्राई से स्टार्ट करो और सक्सेशन को चलने दो, आप कोई इंटरफेरेंस मत करो. द फाइनल रिजल्ट इज गोइंग टू बी द सेम. इट इज गोइंग टू बी अ मेसिक कम्युनिटी, राइट? सो प्राइमरी सक्सेशन दैट हैपेंस फ्रॉम अ ड्राई कंडीशन, that will also lead to mesic, and it starts from a wet condition, it will also lead to a mesic. अब primary succession में the first species that enter on an area that has no other living beings before, the first species that enter are called pioneer species. And in pioneer species का main काम क्या है? Main काम है soil formation. Because एक बार soil form हो गई, उसके बाद तो एक के बाद एक the growth has to happen. Plants are going to come, then small trees, then shrubs, then big trees. Right? तो ये soil formation का काम is being done by pioneer species. Now, which species are pioneer species? They are mainly lichens and mosses. Mosses are a type of plant. This type of plant group is called bryophyte. And lichens are, I think you already know what lichens are. They are association between fungi and algae. Lichens are association between fungi and algae. And mosses are a type of plant. This type of plant is called bryophyte. These are the first group of species that come in a region where it is completely dry and they start forming plants. Okay. If they start forming soil, then once soil comes, more and more plants form. Okay. Finally, a stable climax community will form. Wet conditions में क्या होगा? The pioneer species are phytoplankton, followed by rooted submerged plants, followed by floating plants, followed by swamp, then scrubs, then finally a tree. Right? In secondary succession, the soil is already there. Soil already बन चुकी है, so you don't need lichens and mosses here. Soil already बनी हुई है, just a forest fire has killed everybody. So the first available plants that are going to come in secondary succession depend on कि वहां पे किस तरह का water है उस टाइम पे, किस तरह के seeds हैं, किस तरह के propagules हैं. Right? It depends कि उस टाइम पे क्या है. Generally they are grasses. Generally grasses come first because soil is already there. Primary succession is going to take much longer because उसमें soil formation होनी है. Soil formation is a very slow process, and the final result is going to be the same in both cases. The final result is going to be a mesic community, or a community that has neither too much water, a community that is neither too dry. Somewhere in the middle, it is going to form a mesic community. Okay, ये primary succession from dry to forest हमने देख लिया. ये ecological succession again from completely wet to final, again we have seen the same result. अब ये देखते हैं secondary succession. Secondary succession में क्या हुआ? Fire हुई, so all of these plants died, but still some soil was there. So they started with grasses, then again shrubs, small trees, and finally climax community of big trees. अब हम ये सोचेंगे यार कि अगर ऐसा ही है तो पूरे अर्थ में हर जगह, why don't we get this climax community? Why don't we get climax community everywhere in the earth? हर जगह ऐसे ही फॉरेस्ट बन जाने चाहिए. This does not happen because the environment keeps on changing. कहीं पे क्लाइमेटिक कंडीशंस चेंज हो गई, कहीं पे इंटरफेरेंस हो गई, विंड ब्लो ज्यादा हो गया, कहीं फॉरेस्ट फायर आ गया, कहीं पे ह्यूमंस डिड सम इंटरवेंशन, कहीं पे सम एनिमल डिड सम इंटरवेंशन. सो फाइनली दिस प्रोसेस इज देयर, बट इन द मिडल if some intervention happens, it goes back to the previous stage. Like I told you, if there is some intervention in the middle, पूरी फायर लग जाए तो हो सकता है बिल्कुल यहां पहुंच जाए, अगर थोड़ी फायर लगे तो हो सकता है यहां से यहां पहुंच जाए. तो दिस डायनेमिक प्रोसेस कीप्स ऑन हैपनिंग. ओके, तो दिस इज द एग्जांपल ऑफ प्राइमरी एंड सेकेंडरी सक्सेशन. इनके जो डिफरेंसेस हैं और जो सिमिलैरिटीज हैं, दे आर रिटन हियर. आई हैव एक्सप्लेन्ड ऑल ऑफ देम. ये जो सेंटर में लिखी हैं, these things are common, that finally the climax community is going to take place, and it is going to happen over a long period of time. Now in a primary succession, what is different? It starts on a bare rock, soil must be formed, and would occur after lava has cooled down to form the rock, and no previous life is there. Okay, in a secondary succession, soil is already present, so it can happen after a forest fire. Grasses are generally the first, वहां पे lichens and moss are generally the first to come, and obviously secondary succession is going to be much faster than primary succession. Okay, अब देखो, now when the succession is happening, when one after the other new and new forms of communities are happening, जो final climax community है, this, it is not the community that has the maximum diversity, right? The maximum diversity is not in the final community. It is just here, just before the climax community. जो final climax बना था, ये जो final climax बना था, इससे just पहले यहां पे, at this place the maximum diversity is there, not at the final community. Why? I'll tell you. Because at this place, just before the final community, just before the climax is achieved, there is very high diversity, but यहाँ पे there is the process of competition, the process of niche overlap, the process of competitive exclusion that we have read yesterday, and finally we reach to a climax community which is then in equilibrium with the current environmental stage. जो current environment है उसके साथ the climax is in equilibrium. Environment change होगी, फिर से change हो जाएगा, but climax is not the community that has the maximum diversity. This community has the maximum diversity. There is certain influence, there is certain competition. Because of this competition and niche overlap, some of these species will die, and then finally the equilibrium of climax community will be achieved. Okay, now there are 4 types of succession written here. First is autogenic succession. Autogenic means that the changes are happening by the living inhabitants of that community themselves. वही जो वहां पे रह रहे हैं वही changes करा रहे हैं. Autogenic, self. Auto means self. So autogenic means to the self. When there are changes, there are living inhabitants of that same community, they are causing the changes. That would be autogenic. Allogenic means to the side. Allogenic means to the side. So when they are brought about by outside forces, when the succession is brought about by outside forces, it would be allogenic. Now no succession is completely autogenic, no succession is completely allogenic. It is a mixture between the two, right? Now there is autotrophic succession. Autotrophic, where initially green plants are going to dominate. Right? That would be autotrophic succession. Heterotrophic, in which initially heterotrophs are going to dominate. Obviously, most successions, 99.9% are the autotrophic succession, because mostly green plants have to be established first, but there could be some cases where heterotrophic succession could be there. Okay, all right. Now, अगर आप एक continent देखो, if there is a huge, let's say this is the continent of Australia, and through a forest fire, I completely knock out all of Australia. I knock out all of the plants that are living there. Still some seeds will grow, some succession is going to happen, some communities are going to grow. So in the middle of a continent, because they can get the seeds or the propagules or the small parts that lead to the growth of new plants, they are going to come to the middle of the continent first because of the influence of abiotic factors. So middle of a continent पे generally the succession happens faster, because पूरे continent से propagules, small seeds, lichens के छोटे-छोटे organisms, moss के छोटे-छोटे organisms are going to come to the center. So in a continent, in a large continent, succession generally happens faster if it is in the middle, right? Rather than at an edge, because edge पे पहुंचना would be difficult, but middle पे from all directions propagules could come, right? Now there is a scientist called Clement who has given the 6 phases in which succession happens. ये 6 phases क्या है? पहला है nudation. Nudation is the development that starts at a bare site. Bare site means जहां पे कुछ नहीं है, वहां पे the development start, जो disturbance हुई वहां पे start हुआ, that would be called nudation. Then there will be migration. Migration is the arrival of propagules of seeds of small species to that particular place. Then echesis. Echesis is establishment of the initial growth. Establishment of initial growth or vegetation would be echesis. Then finally competition. अब क्या होगा जब growth और vegetation हो गई, there would be competition between the well established vegetation. Vegetation grow हो गई, establish हो गई, अब वो आपस में compete करना start करेंगे. Once they start competing, some will be eliminated, right? So ये 4 stages हैं. पहली nudation, the first disturbance, then migration, then echesis, and finally competition. After that there is going to be reaction. Here there are going to be autogenic changes. Reaction mean आपस में ही वो compete करके some will eliminate the other, right? So some autogenic changes are going to happen, and finally there would be stabilization and the generation of a stable climax community, right? So in Clement's theory of succession there are 6 stages, starting from nudation, then migration and coming of propagules, echesis, that is the growth of vegetation, competition, then autogenic changes or reaction, and finally stabilization or the development of a climax community. Okay, now this ends our study of succession. We will now move on to biogeochemical cycles. These are the biogeochemical cycles that we have to read: water cycle, nitrogen, carbon cycle, phosphorus cycle, sulfur and oxygen cycle. तो अब हम इनको डिटेल में देखते हैं. ओके, बायोजियोकेमिकल साइकिल का वर्ड का मीनिंग क्या है? लेट्स डू द वर्ड ब्रेकडाउन. बायो मींस लिविंग एंड जियो मींस अर्थ. So between living and earth, certain nutrients are being cycled. पहले earth से वो living beings में जा रहे हैं, जैसे soil से plants have taken it, they go into living beings. Then from the living beings, after the living beings die, or when the living beings excrete things, they go back into the earth. So this process of cycling of nutrients from bio, from living to the earth and back, this process is called biogeochemical cycle. हमने देखा था that in an ecosystem, nutrient cycling was an important thing. This nutrient cycling is what is happening through a biogeochemical cycle. So कार्बन, हाइड्रोजन, ऑक्सीजन, नाइट्रोजन, फॉस्फोरस, ये जो एलिमेंट्स हैं ये हमारी बॉडीज में भी प्रेजेंट है, ये एनवायरमेंट में भी प्रेजेंट है, एंड देयर इज साइक्लिंग बिटवीन द टू, राइट? सो मिनरल न्यूट्रिएंट्स, दे आर ऑलवेज इन सर्कुलेशन, moving from living to non-living, then non-living to living and back. And this is a circular fashion of movement. This is therefore called a cycle. दो तरह के cycles होते हैं. The first one is a gaseous cycle. Gaseous cycle would mean that the reservoir, the place where that particular nutrient is stored, it is a gas. A sedimentary cycle would mean that the reservoir is the earth's crust or the nutrient is stored as a particular rock. So it could be the earth's crust or it could be the atmosphere, ocean and gas, right? So if it's stored as gas in the atmosphere or in the ocean as vapor, that would be nutrient gaseous cycle. And if it is stored in the earth's crust as rock, that would be sedimentary cycle. अब इसके examples easy हैं. If you look at carbon, if you look at hydrogen, if you look at nitrogen, of course these are things that we know are either as water vapor or they are as gases, they are in the air. So they have atmospheric cycles. If we look at phosphorus and sulfur, they have sedimentary cycles. अब जो gas से conversion का तरीका है, from a gas being converted into a nutrient, that process is much faster and much quicker. Therefore, gaseous cycles are generally faster and quicker. In a sedimentary cycle, what is going to happen is weathering, breakdown of rock. अब ये weathering or breakdown of rock is generally a slow phenomenon. So sedimentary cycles are generally comparatively slower than gaseous cycles. Okay. So water cycle. Water cycle is continuous movement of water on earth. अब इन cycles में हमें कुछ कुछ processes समझनी है कि किन किन process से this cycling is happening, right? So the first process in water cycle is evaporation. Evaporation is conversion of water into water vapor, right? Water evaporates, let's say, from the surface of water bodies like oceans, seas, lakes, etc. The second process is sublimation. Sublimation means direct conversion from solid to vapor. अगर ice directly gets converted to water vapor, ice सीधा water vapor बन जाए without forming liquid, That would be the idea of sublimation. And where does this happen? This happens in the ice caps and ice sheets. Okay, they get converted into water vapor directly without converting into liquid. Then there is the process of transpiration. Transpiration क्या है? देखो, plants हैं. Plants have to take water from the soil and pull them up to their leaves. What does a plant have to do? It has a plant, let's say, or a tree. It has a leaf here, let's say. तो इसको यहां से वाटर पुल अप करके यहां तक पहुंचाना है. एंड इनके पास कोई फिजिकल बकेट तो है नहीं. So what it does is it starts losing water from its leaves through stomata. इसकी डिटेल में जाने की जरूरत नहीं है, बट यहां से they start losing water like this. So they suck water from here and they start losing water from the top. So this pull of water here pushes if they pull the water up here, this pull of water drives the water from the root to the leaf of the plant. This loss of water at the level of the leaf in the form of water vapor, loss of water at the leaf in the form of water vapor is what is called transpiration. So transpiration is the process by which plants release water vapor into the atmosphere through their stomata in their leaves and stems. This is why if there are many trees in a location, there is going to be lot of water loss. And जब ज्यादा trees होंगे, water loss, water vapor ज्यादा बनेगा, ज्यादा clouds बनेंगे, and the chances of rain are higher. Then there is condensation. Condensation तो हमें पता है, water vapor is there. When there is low temperature, it will get converted back into vapor. So water vapor at higher altitude condensing to form water droplets. That would be the idea of condensation. Formation of clouds, formation of fog. This is all condensation. Precipitation. Precipitation is falling down of water. This could happen in form of drizzle, rain, snow, hail. All of this is precipitation. अब दो तीन और यहाँ पे processes हैं जो हमें पता करनी है. The first one is surface runoff. When water falls on the surface, let's say it falls like this on the surface, it can either go down into the groundwater or अगर ज्यादा हो तो it could run off from the surface and go to the nearby water body. So this movement like this is surface runoff, and this falling down and going into the groundwater is the idea of infiltration and percolation. So infiltration and percolation would mean that water is going down as groundwater, and surface runoff would mean that water is falling here and then going in this direction. Because the ground does not have the ability to absorb it, it just runs off the surface. Sometimes it leads to the erosion of the topsoil. ये आपने geography में पढ़ा होगा. This erosion of the topsoil also happens when there is excess precipitation. So when there is precipitation, when the water falls down on the ground, it could either go down, do infiltration and percolation, or it could run off like this. This runoff sometimes takes off the top layer of the soil, leading to loss of fertility of the soil. So these are the processes that are involved in a water cycle. अब ये स्लाइड बहुत ज्यादा इंपॉर्टेंट है बिकॉज इस पे 3 बार यूपीएससी क्वेश्चन पूछ चुका है ऑलरेडी इन द लास्ट 10 years. So please take care of this, what I'm teaching you here. Please listen to this carefully. Where is the Earth's water? Earth का water cycle कैसे stored है, कहां किस तरह से stored है, कितना % water कहां है? This is important and this is what I'm going to teach you. So in the oceans there is 96.5% of the Earth's water. In the oceans there is 96.5% of the Earth's water. There is some other saline water in small seas, in lakes. This is 0.9%. So if you add these two, you get 97.4. 97.4% of the Earth's water is saline water, either in oceans, 96.5% in oceans, and 0.9% in other saline water areas like seas or saline lakes. Then अब कितना बचा? 2.5% बचा. ये जो 2.5% है, this is the earth fresh water. अब ये 2.5% के आगे इस 2.5% के डिस्ट्रीब्यूशन हम अब देखते हैं. इस 2.5% में से the ground water is about 30%. Okay, the ice caps and glaciers is about 68.7%. And the surface fresh water is about 1.2%. Okay, so there is 30% out of this 2.5% which is fresh water. इस 2.5% का 30% is groundwater, 68.7% is ice water or glaciers or ice caps, and just 1.2% is the surface water, which is rivers, freshwater lakes, freshwater reservoirs, etc. Okay. Now, ये जो surface का 1.2% बचा, ये 1.2%, इस 1.2% की further division देख रहे हैं. ये जो 1.2% और 2.5% बचा, 2.5% फ्रेश वाटर था, उसका 1.2% सरफेस पे था. इस सरफेस को अगर हम आगे डिवाइड करें तो ये कहां है? दिस इज इन द फॉर्म ऑफ लेक्स मेनली. एट लेक्स हैव 20%. द ग्राउंड लेवल आइस और द ग्राउंड लेवल परमाफ्रॉस्ट हैज अबाउट 69%. Okay, rest is in rivers, rest is in the atmosphere, rest is in some is in living things, some is in swamps and marshes, right? So going back again, let me just revisit this because it is slightly important. 96.5% is in the oceans, 0.9% is other saline water. इसके बाद जो 2.5% बच गया, उस 2.5% में से glaciers and ice caps have about 70% and groundwater has about 30%. The remaining small 1% is the surface freshwater. This surface freshwater also, ground ice and permafrost is 70%, lakes are 20%, and the rest is in soil moisture, in swamps, in rivers, in living things, in atmosphere. Please revise this slide well when you are going to the exam, because these things have been asked many times. Okay, so this is what the water cycle looks like. From here there is evaporation, then finally condensation to form clouds, precipitation in the falling back of rain, sublimation happens here to form water vapor, transpiration happens here to form water vapor, then again precipitation happens to form this. There could be surface runoff or there could be percolation down into the groundwater. Okay, all right. Now let's move on to the next cycle, which is the carbon cycle. Now carbon cycle, carbon is occurring in various forms. We have already seen Buckminster fullerene is also a type of carbon. We have seen graphene, we have seen coal, diamond. These are all forms of carbon. ठीक है, Buckminster fullerene, graphene, coal, diamond, ये सारे forms of carbon हैं, right? Now carbon also appears in the form of carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, carbonate salts in associated forms, right? All living beings are made up of carbon containing molecules. Now carbon is there in proteins, carbon is there in nucleic acid in some form. Mainly it is nitrogen, but carbon is also there. Hamari bodies are also made up of carbon. We have seen even fats contain carbon. So carbon is there in living organisms, it is there in the air, it is there in the form of charcoal, diamond, graphite, etc. So बहुत तरीके हैं carbon to be there in the atmosphere in our earth. अब कौन सी processes हैं that govern the carbon cycle? Let us see those. कि ये carbon cycle कैसे होता है? So what are the sources of carbon release? First is of course the burning of fossil fuels. जो हम fossil fuels burn कर रहे हैं वो carbon dioxide release कर रहा है. Second, there are natural processes like volcanic eruption, like respiration, like the decay of organic matter. All of this is also releasing carbon in the air. अब respiration and photosynthesis हमने कल पढ़ा था. So just remember, if there is C6H12O6, if I use oxygen to break it down into CO2 and water and energy, this is the process of respiration. So carbon release is happening. So respiration is a source of carbon. If there is carbon dioxide and water, and I use chlorophyll and sunlight to convert it into C6H12O6 and oxygen, so this will be the process of photosynthesis. So photosynthesis is a sink of carbon. Sink means a place where carbon is absorbed. Photosynthesis is a sink of carbon. Respiration is a source of carbon. So what are the sources of carbon? Burning of fossil fuels, volcanic eruption, respiration, decay. Sink is photosynthesis. ये तो हमने देख ही लिया. Now, an important sink of carbon is oceans. जब हम pollution पढ़ेंगे तब हम चीज को डिटेल में देखेंगे या climate change में देखेंगे. Oceans जो हैं, atmospheric carbon dioxide में कई सारा carbon is absorbed in the ocean. When in the tomorrow's first slide, I'll show you how this happens. ठीक है? How the oceanic food chain leads to carbon sequestration. So oceans are a huge sink. Oceans are a huge sink for carbon. and 33% of atmospheric carbon dioxide is taken up by the ocean. तो जो atmospheric carbon dioxide है कैसे होता है ये कल दिखाता हूं. Through the food chain in the ocean, a lot of atmospheric carbon dioxide is taken into the ocean, right? अब अगर atmospheric carbon dioxide बढ़ जाए, let's say there is a lot of atmospheric carbon dioxide, तो क्या होगा, ओशन के अंदर ज्यादा कार्बन डाइऑक्साइड जाने लगेगी, राइट? 33% जानी है. अगर there is, let's say, 1 million tons of carbon dioxide, 33% of that is going to go. If there is 1 billion tons, then also 33% of that is going to go in the ocean. So in the second case, ocean will absorb a lot more carbon dioxide than what is normally there. So if it starts absorbing, the ocean starts absorbing more carbon dioxide than what is normally there, it leads to the phenomena of ocean acidification. Why? Because carbon dioxide will react with water to form carbonic acid in the oceans. If this carbonic acid is beyond a certain level, then the ocean gets acidified. तो जो term आपने सुनी है ocean acidification, that happens when we pollute the environment with a lot of carbon dioxide. So that is the idea of ocean acidification. Okay. Now at the poles, there is dry ice formation. What is dry ice formation? Dry ice is solid carbon dioxide. This is also a sink of carbon dioxide. जो कार्बन एयर में है उसको डायरेक्टली आइस में, या ड्राई आइस कहते हैं उसको, ड्राई आइस में कन्वर्ट किया जाता है एट द पोल्स. So the sinks of carbon could A be photosynthesis, could be the oceans, or could be the dry ice formation at poles, right? अब जब climate change होता है, when global warming happens, the ice formation or the temperature at the poles goes up. Ice formation की ability खत्म हो जाती है, तो फिर से carbon dioxide gets released. So this idea that due to climate change, the sinks of carbon dioxide, they go low and more carbon dioxide gets released, which then causes more global warming. This is the positive feedback loop of the phenomena of climate change. Okay, sources समझ आ गए, sinks समझ आ गए, right? Now in short term, what are the processes that are impacting the carbon cycle? There is photosynthesis, there is respiration, there is decomposition. In the long term, carbon also gets accumulated to form coal. It also gets accumulated to form fossil fuels. तो जो long term deposition of carbon है as PT layers in marshy soil, insoluble carbonates, as bottom sediments, and formation of fossil fuels like coal, oil, natural gas, this is also a part of the carbon cycle. Okay, so when they are burnt, when these fossil fuels are burnt, जब हम गाड़ी में इनको burn करते हैं, again there is the release of carbon dioxide. So this is the whole process of the carbon cycle. From the atmosphere, carbon is stored through photosynthesis into green plants. Green plants decompose, okay, they can release carbon dioxide back. Respiration भी कर रहे हैं plants, उससे carbon dioxide could be released back. They could be eaten by animals. Then animals could be decomposed. Animals could do respiration, again release of atmospheric carbon dioxide. If these plants, they get fossilized, long time pe they stay as sedimentary rocks and get fossilized, they will lead to the formation of fossil fuels. And when there is combustion, again there will be atmospheric carbon dioxide. So this is the graphical representation of the entire carbon cycle. Now, the next cycle we have to do is nitrogen cycle, but I understand that some break is required. So I'll give you a 2 minutes break and then we'll continue with nitrogen cycle, sulfur cycle, phosphorus cycle, and finally oxygen cycle. No, please study biomes from GC Leong. Okay, I'll fix the mic. Next time I'll fix it. I'll ask them to fix the mic, please. Okay. So next we are going to understand the nitrogen cycle. अब देखो, nitrogen is very important for the survival of an all living organisms. Why? Because proteins, DNA, chlorophyll, all of these things, and you know what these things are. In तीनों में nitrogen is a component. So nitrogen is a component of the amino acids that are used to form proteins. Nitrogen is a component of DNA. जो bases होते हैं DNA के, the bases that we have read, A, G, C, T, they are actually called nitrogenous bases. Why? Because nitrogen is a huge component in them. तो हम समझ सकते हैं that nitrogen is very important for all living organisms. Okay. Now, if nitrogen is very important for all living organisms, right? But nitrogen है कहाँ? It is in the atmosphere. And atmosphere से nitrogen को cannot be used directly by this atmospheric nitrogen cannot be used directly by living organisms. So plants and animals cannot utilize this atmospheric nitrogen directly. So what they have to do is it has to be converted into some other form, in the form of ammonia, in the form of nitrate, for them to be used. This conversion of atmospheric nitrogen, which they can't use, to usable forms like ammonia, amino acids or nitrates, this conversion happens through the nitrogen cycle. So now let's see the nitrogen cycle in detail. नाइट्रोजन साइकिल का जो मोस्ट इंपॉर्टेंट स्टेप है, जो आपने कहीं ना कहीं सुना भी होगा, is the term nitrogen fixation. This nitrogen fixation is what? It is the conversion of nitrogen from the air into reactive forms in the soil, which can then be used. अब ये कौन करा रहा है ये फिक्सेशन, और ये कौन कौन से रिएक्टिव फॉर्म्स हैं? लेट्स सी. So nitrogen fixation can happen in three ways. It can be biological. Biological means certain bacteria are doing it, certain fungi are doing it, right? Then there is lightning. Lightning से क्या होता है? That there is nitrogen in the air that gets converted into nitric oxides or NOx. अब ये NOx में NOx क्यों लिखा जाता है? Could be NO2, could be NO3, could be N2O4, could be N2O. We will read that when we do pollution. ये convert हो जाते हैं to NOx through the idea of lightning. And then when rain falls on the ground, this nitrate gets converted, this NOx get converted into nitric acid. When this rain carries nitric acid, it is called acid rain. And this NOx form is a reactive form that plants can use. So lightning is one way of nitrogen fixation. Fixation is what? Conversion of the atmospheric form to a usable form. जो atmosphere में है उसको convert करके एक usable form is fixation. Now this fixation could happen through lightning. It could happen through some biological factors like bacteria, like blue-green algae, etc. Or it could happen through chemicals. Chemicals में the thing is that nitrogen plus hydrogen gives rise to formation of ammonia. This is done in the formation of chemicals like urea. This is called the Haber process. जो हम नाइट्रोजनस फर्टिलाइजर्स देते हैं उसमें also this process happens that nitrogen plus hydrogen finally gives urea. No, sorry, finally gives ammonia, and this ammonia is then used to form urea. So this is called the Haber process, the chemical fixation of nitrogen done by humans. So nitrogen fixation could be biological, it could be due to lightning, it could be due to chemical processes. अब जो biological nitrogen fixation है ये कैसे होती है? They could be free living nitrifying bacteria like aerobic bacteria called azotobacter. फ्री लिविंग का मतलब क्या है कि ये किसी सिम्बायोटिक एसोसिएशन में नहीं रह रहे, ये अपने आप से सॉइल में रहते हैं. एरोबिक बैक्टीरिया क्या क्या मतलब? एरोबिक वर्ड ब्रेकडाउन. एरोबिक मींस दैट दे आर डिपेंडेंट ऑन ऑक्सीजन और द एयर टू डू देयर फिक्सेशन. सो दे आर फ्री लिविंग बैक्टीरिया इन द सॉइल that convert atmospheric nitrogen into something that is usable by plants, or it could be an anaerobic bacteria meaning clostridium. Clostridium क्या हुआ? फ्री लिविंग बैक्टीरिया, कहीं पे ये सिम्बायोसिस या एसोसिएशन में नहीं रहता, बट विदाउट द यूज ऑफ ऑक्सीजन इट कन्वर्ट्स द एटमॉस्फेरिक नाइट्रोजन इनटू अ यूजेबल फॉर्म, राइट? सो फर्स्टली जब हम बायोलॉजिकल नाइट्रोजन फिक्सेशन देख रहे थे उसमें देयर कुड बी फ्री लिविंग नाइट्रीफाइंग बैक्टीरिया. व्हाई आर दे कॉल्ड नाइट्रीफाइंग, ये अभी आपको क्लियर हो जाएगा. बट फ्री लिविंग बैक्टीरिया हैं, दे आर कॉल्ड नाइट्रीफाइंग बैक्टीरिया. इनका एग्जांपल है अजोटोबैक्टर. अजोटोबैक्टर इज एरोबिक, so it depends on air. And then there is clostridium which is anaerobic. Since clostridium is anaerobic, it does not depend on air, right? So there is free living nitrifying bacteria, aerobic azotobacter and anaerobic clostridium. Now there is symbiotic nitrifying bacteria. Symbiosis का मतलब हमें पता है कि it is living in association. Symbiotic nitrifying bacteria living in association with leguminous plants. Leguminous plants और legumes का example है pulses, pea. You know, think plants like those which give you protein are called legumes. Plants like pulses, dal, horse gram, chana, pea, etc. Here there are certain bacteria living in association with them, so called symbiotic bacteria. These symbiotic nitrifying bacteria could also do the process of nitrogen fixation. यहाँ symbiosis क्यों कहा जा रहा है? Because in the root nodules of leguminous plants, these bacteria are living. Bacteria help the plant absorb nitrogen by doing nitrogen fixation. And plant give what to the bacteria? Plant give food to the bacteria. So this is a symbiotic association between this particular bacteria and this particular plant. Plant को क्या मिल रहा है? नाइट्रोजन मिल रही है फिक्स होके, and bacteria को क्या मिल रहा है? Bacteria को food मिल रहा है. इनके example, the main example here is Rhizobium, right? You must have heard of this bacteria. The main example here is Rhizobium. There are also certain blue-green algae that are doing this job. Blue-green algae is the other name of cyanobacteria, and इनका नाम है Anabina and Nostoc. Don't worry, आगे एक table में all of these are written in one place, so you don't need to worry. All of these are written in one place in a table. Okay, so first process is called nitrogen fixation. In nitrogen fixation, we turn certain nitrogen in the air into a reactive form, into a usable form. Then there is the process of nitrification. Nitrification is transformation of ammonia. तो हो क्या रहा है यहाँ पे? Originally, there is nitrogen in the air. Certain bacteria are first turning it into NH3. This is the process of nitrogen fixation. NH3 का दूसरा नाम होता है ammonia. Now, ammonia can be further turned into NO2 or NO3. Nitrates or nitrites, and these are taken up by the plants. तो पहले आप इसमें कन्वर्ट करो, फिर आप NO2 या NO3 में कन्वर्ट करो, and this NO2 and NO3 can be taken up by the plants. Plants cannot use this form directly, and plants cannot take it from the air. Plants have to take it from the soil. तो soil में पहुंचने के लिए आप पहले NH3 में कन्वर्ट करो, then you convert into NO2 or NO3, and then the plants take it up. तो ये जो NO2 और NO3 में कन्वर्जन है, नाइट्राइट और नाइट्रेट में कन्वर्जन है, this is done by bacteria like Nitrosomonas that convert it into nitrite, and then further Nitrobacter that converts it into nitrate. Nitrite is NO2, nitrate is NO3. Okay. So पहले अमोनिया में कन्वर्ट करने के लिए कुछ बैक्टीरिया देख लिए, Rhizobium, Anabina, Nostoc. Just the names are important. उसके बाद they would convert into nitrite through nitrosomonas and finally convert to nitrate by nitrobacter. This conversion into nitrate, then this would be taken up by the plant. This process is called assimilation or absorption. So plant will absorb the nitrate ions and use them for making organic compounds. Which organic compounds? Organic compounds like amino acid. And what are amino acids? They are building blocks of protein. This we have already seen. तो प्लांट ने पहले नाइट्रेट को उठाया, उससे अमीनो एसिड बनाया, then the amino acid in the plant is eaten by herbivores. Herbivores now got the protein. Now we either eat the herbivore or we can eat the plant. So we can either obtain plant protein or animal protein. So अब the nitrogen from the air has come to the soil. From the soil it has come to the plant. From the plant it has come to the other herbivores, and from the herbivores it has come to us. So from a geological location, from the air, it has entered my body. So this is a biogeochemical cycle. Now one process is remaining. From my body, it has to go back to the soil. How does that happen? That process is called ammonification. So once the animals die, like once I die or the plants that have taken up the ammonia, they die, the process of decomposition starts. So this decomposition of either the death of either the dead body or the waste products like our urine. Why is urine called urine? If you just see the name, it is close to urea, because urine also contains the same nitrogenous compounds that are there in urea. That is why it is said that if you urinate on plants, plants will grow better. It is like a fertilizer from them, because it also contains the same nitrogenous compounds. So either the waste product of animals or the dead body of animals is decomposed by decomposers and detritivores, and this decomposition of this nitrogenous waste like the waste we produce, like urea or urine or uric acid, this is also a waste we produce, right? Our urine contains urea. The same nitrogenous compound in urea is contained in our urine also. So this urine, this nitrogenous waste, when it is decomposed by certain bacteria and fungi, they are called decomposers, and we have read that yesterday. This leads to formation of again ammonia. So now the ammonia has returned back to the soil. Now how will this go back to the air? Ammonia does not go back to the air. The nitrate or the nitrite, this can be converted back to nitrogen by certain denitrifying bacteria known as Pseudomonas. So if I see the entire cycle, right? If I see the entire cycle, what is happening? There is atmospheric nitrogen. Certain nitrogen fixing bacteria have converted it into ammonia or ammonium, right? Nitrogen fixing bacteria have converted it into ammonia or ammonium, NH4 or NH3. Then this is taken up by the plant, this is converted into nitrites, then converted into nitrates. These nitrates are taken up by the plant. Plant are eaten by the animal. Now plant will die, animal will die, the animal will release certain waste. This waste released will then back be converted into ammonia. Ammonia again to the idea of nitrites, again to the idea of nitrates. Now some bacteria convert this nitrate back to atmospheric nitrogen. So let's see all the processes that have happened. First process was nitrogen fixation or ammonification, that is conversion of atmospheric nitrogen to ammonia. First process, ammonification. Second process, conversion of ammonia into nitrites, called nitrification. Nitrification, first process, ammonia into nitrites. Then nitrites to nitrates, again called nitrification. These nitrates are then taken up by plants, process called assimilation. Assimilation means kattha karna. So these nitrates are then taken up by the plant. Plant is eaten by the animal. So plant will then die, or animal will die, or they will release nitrogenous waste. Then there is decomposition. Decomposition again leads to the process of ammonia. Ammonia, then again nitrification, then again nitrification. At this level of nitrates, at the level of NO3, there is certain process called denitrification. This will convert this to atmospheric nitrogen. So from the geographical location of the air, it goes to the soil. Through the soil, it forms ammonia. Ammonia is then formed into nitrates. Nitrate taken up into the body, so it becomes a biogeochemical cycle. To get back, it has to then again convert to ammonia, convert to nitrates, and then from nitrates, it gets back into the air through denitrification. Now, what are the bacteria that are involved here? The bacteria that are involved in nitrogen fixation are these. In ammonification, there are these bacteria. In nitrification, there are these bacteria. And in denitrification, there are these bacteria. The table is here. You can read from here. And I've already mentioned their names. If I repeat them, you'll get confused. These are the same names that I have written in the previous slide. What is happening? Ammonium is being converted into nitrite. Nitrite is being converted into nitrate. Nitrate is being taken up by the plant and animal. They are being converted into ammonia. This process is going on, and certain denitrifying bacteria from nitrate are converting it into atmospheric nitrogen. This is the whole nitrogen cycle that operates in our atmosphere. Now, certain quantity of soil nitrates are also soluble in water, so they get transported away by the surface runoff. So one more thing that is happening in this entire cycle, except for everything else, is that some nitrates get soluble in water and they get flown away. Some nitrogen fixation is also happening due to humans, due to the Haber process, and some is also happening due to lightning. The toughest cycle that we have to study is the nitrogen cycle, but I hope all the processes now are clear to you. Just remember it schematically and remember the name of the bacteria and you will be sorted. Now, the next cycle that we have to study is phosphorus cycle. Now, as we had read, phosphorus is a terrestrial cycle. Okay, it does not have any atmospheric component. It has no atmospheric component. Okay, ये है ही नहीं इसमें, because there is no gaseous component here. It is a rock-based cycle. So this phosphorus cycle, unlike carbon and nitrogen, which are primarily in the atmosphere, the phosphorus cycle is mainly working as a mineral. So phosphate rocks enter the cycle. From phosphate rocks are there. Phosphate is stored in the rocks, and how is it entering the soil? How is it entering the cycle? It is entering through the process of erosion and mining. Because air में इसका कोई reservoir नहीं है. इसका जो reservoir है, that is mainly in the earth's crust. So this is the nutrient considered to be the main cause of excessive growth of rooted and free floating microscopic plants in lakes. एक phenomena होता है eutrophication. हम पढ़ेंगे when we read pollution. There is a phenomena called eutrophication. That idea of eutrophication mainly happens due to phosphorus. But right now let us understand how the cycle of phosphorus works. इसमें कोई atmospheric component नहीं है. Phosphorus is mainly stored in the rocks. So on land, phosphorus is usually found in the form of phosphates. Then through the process of weathering, through the process of erosion, phosphate enters the river, and that river transports that to the ocean. In the ocean, phosphorus accumulates on the continental shelf in the form of deposits. So in the continental shelf there are deposits, and after millions of years, जब बहुत ज़्यादा time यहाँ पे लग जाता है, after millions of years, this deposit then on the crustal plates on the sea floor gets formed, gets deposited there, and when it gets exposed in the form of rocks, and that leads back to formation of phosphates on land. So after some more time, this weathering will release it from the rock. So it's mainly going from the rock to the river to the ocean. In the ocean, it's getting deposited, and that deposition is then stored and then released again as rocks. Then rocks again get weathered. This is one part where no living thing is involved. The second thing is when rock gets weathered, rock has phosphate. When rock gets weathered, phosphate is uptaken by the plant. Then the plant through decomposition is donating it back to the earth's crust. When this weathering is taking the runoff of the phosphate into rivers or in oceans, their phytoplankton is taking it up. Then again, when phytoplankton dies, it is depositing here. It gets fossilized as crust, and then again it gets entered into rock. Then the rocks get weathered. If phosphate is going into plants, of course animals are also taking it because of the presence of a food web. Then again they are decomposed and they are entering back into the crust. So there is no atmospheric component. सब कुछ ही हो रहा है crust और rock के level पे through weathering, through decomposition. Now this is obviously a slower cycle because this main process of weathering that is contributing to phosphorus is a very slow process as compared to, let's say, respiration. Respiration I am doing at this very moment at a very high pace, but weathering happens very, very slowly. All right. अब phosphorus cycle में let me revise some geography with you. ठीक है, आई होप यहां तक समझ आ रहा है. आई होप थिंग्स आर क्लियर टिल हियर. ओनली देन आई विल गो फॉरवर्ड एंड रिवाइज दिस विद यू. थोड़ा एल नीनो ला नीना आई थॉट आई रिवाइज बिकॉज इसमें लोगों को कंफ्यूजन रहती है. इस बार एल नीनो आने वाला है, सो देयर आर चांसेस ऑफ क्वेश्चंस आल्सो. ऑल्दो दिस इज नॉट स्ट्रिक्टली एनवायरमेंट, बट स्टिल आई थॉट आई रिवाइज अ लिटिल बिट ऑफ ज्योग्राफी विद यू ताकि आपको थोड़ा याद हो जाए बिकॉज प्रीलिम्स आर कमिंग. जस्ट टेल मी इफ टिल हियर थिंग्स आर क्लियर टू यू, देन वी विल रिवाइज दिस. बढ़िया यार, अगर समझ आ रहा है. नाइट्रोजन साइकिल इज जनरली डिफिकल्ट टू अंडरस्टैंड, बट इफ यू अंडरस्टूड इट ग्रेट. ओके, नाउ देखो, गुआनो बर्ड ड्रॉपिंग्स. गुआनो क्या है? गुआनो इज अ बर्ड. इसकी ड्रॉपिंग्स में फॉस्फोरस होता है. ओके, एंड दिस एक्ट एज फर्टिलाइजर. बिकॉज कहां से आया होगा इसकी ड्रॉपिंग्स में फॉस्फोरस? इसने कोई प्लांट खाया होगा, राइट? इट मस्ट हैव ईटन सम प्लांट. If it has eaten some plant, then it has found phosphorus in its body. Then in its waste, it is excreting phosphorus. अब ये वेस्ट में फॉस्फोरस है. फॉस्फोरस इज अ माइक्रोन्यूट्रिएंट रिक्वायर्ड फॉर प्लांट ग्रोथ. तो इसकी जो बर्ड ड्रॉपिंग्स होती है ना, दे एक्ट एज फर्टिलाइजर. नाउ लेट अस रिलेट दिस आइडिया विद ज्योग्राफी, राइट? ये है हमारा नॉर्मल ईयर का आइडिया ऑफ ला नीना, विच इज द नॉर्मल ईयर. व्हेन समथिंग ला नीना इज दिस एक्सटेंडेड, जब यही चीज बहुत ज्यादा होने लगती है, इट इज कॉल्ड ला नीना. बट दिस इज व्हाट हैपेंस नॉर्मली. नॉर्मली देयर इज अ कोल्ड करंट ऑन द पेरुवियन कोस्ट. ठीक है, जब कोल्ड करंट होती है तो क्या होता है? द वाटर ऑन द सरफेस गेट्स डिस्प्लेस्ड. व्हेन द वाटर ऑन द सरफेस गेट्स डिस्प्लेस्ड, देयर इज अपवेलिंग. Upwelling means water from the bottom comes up. From the bottom, water starts coming up to the surface. Because of cold current, water is getting displaced. This cold current, where it is going? यहाँ पर there is southeasterly trade wind, so it is getting carried towards the coast of Australia. एक cold current आया, I'll draw it with blue. एक cold current आया called the Humboldt current. This Humboldt current comes off the coast. It carries the water like this, and then because of the southeasterly trade winds, the cold current continues to carry the water towards the Australian coast. Okay, now what is happening here? Here what is happening is that this water that was there, that was displaced. यहां से water चला गया. So there is a process of upwelling. Upwelling means from the bottom of the earth, more water comes to the surface. From the bottom of the earth, bottom of the ocean, more water comes to the surface. Now this upwelling and cold water coming from bottom to the surface leads to increase in nutrients at the surface. Fresh water आ गया ना, ऊपर पहले तो water occupied था, but अभी because of this cold current that is displacing water of the Peruvian coast, some water is coming from the bottom. Now this is fresh water, untouched water. तो यहाँ पे क्या होता है? Because of this fresh water coming, there are more nutrients, so more fish are present. Because of this cold current, water gets upwelled and there are more fish present. When there are more fish present, what will happen? More guano bird will come and hunt that fish. Guano bird fish खाता है. ज्यादा fish होने लगी तो ज्यादा guano bird आता है. So when more guano bird comes, they give more guano droppings. They drop more guano. Guano bird gives more droppings. They excrete more, right? Basically, they shit more on the Peruvian coast. Now, these guano birds and their dropping carries what? It carries phosphorus, which is a natural fertilizer. Because it carries a natural fertilizer on the South American coast, on the Peruvian coast, there is an increase in the soil fertility, and then there is increase in the growth of plants and agriculture. So, in a normal year, South America has a lot of guano droppings, full of fertilizer, full of phosphorus compounds that leads to more growth of agriculture on the South American coast. अब ये जो cold current जा रहा था, where was it going? ये cold current यहाँ गया, then because of southeasterly trade winds, the water reaches the Australian coast. Now, when it reaches the Australian coast, it has traveled the whole world. So the water becomes warm. So there is warm water at the Australian coast, cold water at the South American coast, upwelling, more guano bird dropping, and higher rate of agriculture and fertility here because of guano droppings at the South American coast. This is the normal year. Okay, what happens in El Nino, right? What happens in El Nino that यहाँ पे पानी बहुत ज्यादा 3-4 साल से इकट्ठा हो रहा है at the Australian coast that is coming here, right? यहाँ पे पानी इस प्रोसेस से आया जा रहा था और वो इकट्ठा हो रहा है. So this excess water that is now getting collected at the Australian coast, it starts traveling back. So the normal motion that was there in a normal year, that gets reversed. Now if this normal motion gets reversed, what happens? That now water starts traveling from here to here. As it travels this much, what happens? It becomes hot. So यहाँ पर hot water gets accumulated on the South American coast. Hot water gets accumulated on the South American coast. So there is no longer the presence of a Humboldt current. There is no longer the presence of upwelling. If there is no longer Humboldt current, there is no longer upwelling, there is less fishing, there is less presence of guano birds, and there is a loss of economic prosperity. This loss of economic prosperity is what is called El Nino, right? At the South American coast, this loss of economic prosperity, loss of soil fertility because of the suppression of the Humboldt current due to the counter current from the Australian coast is El Nino, because now there are no longer any bird droppings. अब इससे क्या होता है, यहाँ पे टेम्परेचर चेंज होने लगता है, the water has traveled back, तो यहाँ upwelling होगी, यहाँ cool water आएगा. इससे there are some effects on India also. The effects on India you read from geography. जब first condition बहुत ज्यादा अच्छे से हो जाए, when this gets exaggerated, the normal year gets exaggerated, it becomes La Nina. When this condition gets happening, when the Humboldt current is suppressed, it is called El Nino. El Nino generally leads to a dry monsoon in India. Okay, so this is the geography behind it. Now you go and read from geography today only. Revise this today only. Okay. हम phosphorus cycle कर रहे थे. This is a representation of the phosphorus cycle, right? There is of course कुछ weathering होगी, कुछ plant absorb करेंगे. We are using phosphatic fertilizers also. For fertilizer में generally we use these three compounds. So phosphorus is also there. But the main idea is that there is no atmospheric component. It is happening weathering, then to plant, then to animal, then decomposition, back to the earth. The last cycle or the second last cycle we have to do is sulfur cycle. सल्फर साइकिल का भी जो मेन reservoir है, that is the earth only, right? It is mainly the earth only in the form of minerals like pyrite rock, sulfur rock, some oil, peat, coal also has sulfur, but it also has a atmospheric component. Okay, because there are two gases, hydrogen sulfide H2S and sulfur dioxide SO2, which are also the atmospheric component of this sulfur cycle. So by the weathering of rocks through erosional runoff, decomposition of organic matter, it is carried, this sulfur is released, right? So decomposition could happen, weathering of rocks could happen, erosional runoff could happen. I mean, it's there in the soil, it could be eroded, and that runoff could carry some sulfur component. That is the place where the sulfur gets released in the sulfur cycle, right? It is mainly sedimentary, but it can enter the atmosphere, one, through volcanic eruptions that release hydrogen sulfide and SO2 in these two forms, H2S and SO2. It also could happen from the combustion of fossil fuels, because certain fossil fuels like coal, etc. do carry a small component of sulfur. So when they are burned, आपने देखा होगा कि fossil fuel burning से even SO2 gas is released, right? So they could, this is mainly a sedimentary cycle, but it also has an atmospheric component, right? Now the hydrogen sulfide could get oxidized to sulfur dioxide, and this SO2, when it combines with water, it forms what? It forms sulfuric acid, which is also a component of acid rain. So atmospheric sulfur dioxide is carried back to the earth after being dissolved in rainwater, forming sulfuric acid as acid rain, again gets dissolved into the earth. Then same process that was happening in case of phosphorus. There are rocks that have sulfur, there is coal that has sulfur, it is taken up by the plants also. Plants are forming amino acids from it, taking it. We are also taking some sulfur from the plant. When we are dying or decomposing, again they are forming back into the rocks on the earth. But the important difference is that it does have an atmospheric component. That atmospheric component is in the form of hydrogen sulfide and in the form of sulfur dioxide. Okay. In the form of sulfates, this sulfur is taken up by the plants and incorporated into amino acids. Some amino acids also have sulfur, although mainly they have nitrogen. Now from living organisms, it is carried back to the soil and to the bottom of ponds and lakes through excretion and decomposition. Already we have seen these two processes. Same thing is happening in the case of sulfur. So this is the sulfur cycle. How is it happening? There can be release of hydrogen sulfide. There can be the release of sulfur dioxide. In the atmosphere, they can either be deposited directly or deposited through the process of acid rain. Now, once they are deposited, plants unko lenge, right? Plants, then animals will eat those plants. Then when animals die and plants die, they will be again going back to the soil in the form of sulfates. Of course, some rocks are also there. When their weathering happens, they can be taken up by plants, and kuch weathering se air may be released ho sakta hai, right? So it has an aerial component, but the processes are same: the weathering, excretion, decomposition. Okay. Now, last cycle we have to do is oxygen cycle. Oxygen, as we know, is 21% in the atmosphere. So this is the oxygen cycle. It contributes to 65% of the mass of the human body in the form of water. 70% or 65% or some figure around that is what your body is composed of water. You are 70% water, and huge component of water is of course oxygen, because this is the formula for water. Okay, so what are the main steps in the oxygen cycle? The first is the process of photosynthesis. In photosynthesis, what happens? Carbon dioxide is taken, water is taken, what is released? Oxygen is released. The second process is respiration. In respiration, what has happened? Oxygen is taken, the human will process the oxygen and then do respiration, produce energy and release carbon dioxide and water. Now animals exhale carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere, which is then again taken into the plant through respiration, through photosynthesis, sorry. So the main processes here are photosynthesis and respiration. Photosynthesis will release oxygen, respiration will take up oxygen and release carbon dioxide. Okay, as you can see here, this is the main oxygen cycle. The two main processes here are photosynthesis and respiration. Of course, देखो क्या होगा अगर आपको बोला जाए कि क्या rock weathering will release oxygen? Yes, it can release, because some rock might have sulfates. So when these are released, oxygen will also be released, but this is a very small component. Okay, rock weathering से भी some oxygen is released. Okay, but that is a very small component. Some fossil fuel combustion, also some oxygen might be released, but that is a very small component. The main processes here are photosynthesis and respiration. So that ends our oxygen cycle as well. The last concepts that we have to study today are homeostasis and the ecosystem services, the concept of deep ecology and shallow ecology. There is no concept left. Okay, we have done the conceptual understanding. Let's take a 2 minutes break. Let's just breathe and get back to homeostasis and ecosystem after that. Once we're done with this, it will take 15 minutes to end this. After this, we will do 12 PYQs. Then if you want, you can take a leave, and then I'll revise some DPSPs with you. Okay, all right. So let's take a break for take a break for 2 minutes. Okay, Akash, I'll check that. देखो यार, somebody in the comments is telling me that you should go a little bit slow, and in the next comment somebody is saying please wrap up the class by 6 p.m. See, I can't do both, right? Unfortunately, I am not a photon and I cannot be in superposition. Okay, if you think I'm going fast, just tell me, just write in the discussion, I'll read it and I'll go slower than this. But मुझे लग नहीं रहा यहाँ पे कुछ बहुत ज़्यादा समझने का है, right? This is just if there is not a lot to remember and there's not a lot to understand and there's a lot to remember, I really can't help that, right? That's how the subject is. जहाँ पे समझने वाली चीजें थी, I have explained things to you in a lot of detail also. But these are just cycles, and see, what we are reading here is how the process is happening in nature. So इस चीज को समझना is not something that is either will gain dividends for you or आपको कोई फायदा होगा. If this is how it happens, it has to be remembered like this. What I have done is I have not included these cycles in today's one pager so that I can revise these tomorrow with you. ताकि एक बार आप आज इसे एक बार खुद से देख लो and कल we can revise these again ताकि आपको ये cycles याद रह जाएं. Right? Okay. The class timing is from 4 to 6:30. I finish by 6:30. I finish my teaching by 6:30. उसके बाद का जो काम है, that is optional. That's not required. That we're just having fun and I'm trying to support you in the last few minutes. By 6:30, today's teaching will also complete. I will not go beyond 6:30 in teaching. But what we'll do after that is we'll just talk if we're revising, let's say we're revising DPSPs that we're going to revise today. वो एक ऑप्शनल चीज है and if you want you can leave them. Okay. Now let's talk about homeostasis in an ecosystem. पहले हम समझते हैं कि homeostasis वर्ड का मीनिंग क्या है. Homeostasis means that you are trying to maintain the conditions that are there right now. आपकी body does homeostasis. You maintain the conditions that are there in your body at the moment. Okay. When you are maintaining these conditions, you are maintaining normalcy. You are maintaining the current conditions ताकि आपकी body में कोई untoward changes ना आए. The same thing is done at the level of the ecosystem. So homeostasis in an ecosystem is what? Biological equilibrium between different components, right? तो ecosystem क्या try करता है कि उसके जो आसपास उसकी जो environment है, जो interaction है, जो conditions हैं, that stays stable. Okay, this keeps on changing with time and it's not static. Of course, the equilibrium has to be maintained with the environment, which is not static. It keeps on changing, right? So in this feedback system, there is a feedback system that maintains this homeostasis. Homeostasis meaning that there is a regular level or a normal level of conditions that is there. This feedback system maintains that homeostasis, right? It keeps a check on the various components. One component of the ecosystem could be, let's say, the temperature. Other component could be, there could be biotic and abiotic component. So abiotic component could be temperature or geography or climate, and biotic component could be the population of a particular species. So all of these components, they keep check on each other through a feedback system. This is called homeostasis of an ecosystem. Let's see how it operates. Let's say that in a forest ecosystem, there is one particular input. Some input has come out in the forest ecosystem, something has happened, some input is given. Then there will be some output, right? कुछ हमने input दिया forest ecosystem में, there is a system. इस system में मैंने कुछ input दिया. Input could be, let's say, a rise in temperature. There could be some output of that. Now this output will impact the input. Then only feedback will be established. जो आउटपुट निकला है, या तो वो इस इनपुट को बढ़ा दे या वो इस इनपुट को कम कर दे. जैसे फॉर एग्जांपल, लेट्स से हियर दैट आई से दैट इन एन इकोसिस्टम देयर आर, जो कल एग्जांपल था उसी से समझाता हूं, देयर आर 4 cows. ओके, देयर आर 3 or 2 wolves and 1 lion. Okay, and let's say there are 10 plants. Okay. Now the input that I choose to give here is that I increase the population of cows from 4 to 10. Now, if 10 cows, if this is the input, that there are 10 cows, the number of cows has increased, what is going to happen? The number of plants are not going to increase, right? Plant तो उतने ही है, cows आपने बहुत ज्यादा बढ़ा. जब एकदम से cow की population increase होगी, तो number of wolf population can increase. Wolf population can increase because more wolf will now be able to survive. But number of plants तो change नहीं हुए. So after some time, these cows in competition are going to die, and इनकी population वापस नीचे हो जाएगी. मैंने क्या कहा? There were 4 cows, there were 2 wolves, 1 lion and 10 plants. 4 cows से immediately due to something, some process, दूसरे forest से भाग के 6 और cows आ गई. Right? So now there are 10 cows. अब इन 10 cows की वजह से ये 2 wolf से तो ज्यादा wolf sustain हो सकते हैं. So there could be 3 wolves or 4 wolves that could now survive in this forest till there are 10 cows. So this first thing, what is happening, because of the input, the output is increase in the wolf population, right? So this is a positive feedback. The output that is happening is increasing, so there is a positive feedback. There could also be another feedback कि ये 10 cows आ गई. Now these 10 cows cannot survive on the 10 plants. So eventually the population of plants or the carrying capacity of this ecosystem is not going to be enough to keep these 10 cows. So what is going to happen? This plant population will fall and the cows will die. The cows will die because plants are not enough. So जो output था, that is cows are now dying. Input was cows increased, output was cows dying. So output ने input को negative impact दे दिया. So that is negative feedback. The impact that the output has on the original input, that would be a feedback, and in an ecosystem there could be both positive and negative feedbacks happening, right? If the output increases the input, that would be a positive feedback. If an output decreases the input, that would be a negative feedback. In an ecosystem, homeostasis or a particular condition is maintained through this negative feedback. अगर आपने cows बढ़ा दी, उससे हुआ क्या? उससे हुआ ये कि competition बढ़ गया. The cows could not survive and the cows started dying. So though the input was an increase in cows, the output was a decrease in cows. So the output had a negative impact on the input. So this would be negative feedback. And this negative feedback in an ecosystem is responsible for maintaining the conditions of an ecosystem called homeostasis. Homeostasis means that the particular condition is maintained. So an ecosystem is a self-regulating system that maintains equilibrium and steady state through feedbacks. Okay, through feedback, it maintains a steady state. Okay, positive feedback is increase in the population of organisms at different level, increases the population of organisms at lower level. For example, मान लो इसी example में plants would have increased. If the huge number of plant increase would have been there, then the number of herbivores also would have increased. If the number of herbivore would have increased, the number of wolf would have increased. If the number of wolf would have increased, the number of lions would have increased. So that is a positive feedback. इससे homeostasis नहीं maintain हो रहा, इससे तो disruption हो रहा है. If there were 10 plants, suddenly there became 100 plants. So 4 cows will become 40 cows. 2 wolves will become 20 wolves. 1 lion would become 10 lions. Right? इससे तो ecosystem में disruption हो रहा है through this positive feedback. Okay, but negative feedback is what? Negative feedback is that this increased population of insectivorous animals. Let's say there is increased population of insectivorous animals or herbivores. The population of herbivores gets increased. Okay, herbivores gets increased. फिर क्या होगा? पहले वो बहुत सारे plant खाने लगेंगे. So plant population will fall. जब plant population will fall, the herbivores will feel competition. When the herbivores or the cows will feel competition, they will again die. This is what? Negative feedback. आपने cows बढ़ाई, वो एकदम से बहुत ज्यादा plant खाने लग गई. Plant की population dip हुई, जब plant की population dip हुई, तो cows के पास खाना नहीं बचा. Cows now again will face competition, and out of the 10, पता चलेगा 4 ही जिंदा रही finally because of competition. So this is a negative feedback. This negative feedback is what ensures homeostasis in an ecosystem. Okay, now इस homeostasis को अगर हम ecosystem level पे ना देख के पूरे अर्थ के लेवल पे देखें कि पूरा अर्थ actually maintains a homeostasis, actually maintains the similar conditions. That is what is called Gaia hypothesis. Gaia. Gaia hypothesis. This was given by Professor James Lovelock and Professor Lynn Margulis. And this Gaia hypothesis, what does it say? That living organisms interact with their surroundings in such a way that they form a self-regulating complex system. एक ऐसा सिस्टम है जो खुद ही को रेगुलेट करता है. अगर कुछ बढ़ता है तो वो खुद ही को रेगुलेट करके नेगेटिव फीडबैक देके उसको नीचे ले आता है. बट व्हेन ह्यूमंस इंटरफेयर टू मच in this self-regulating system, then there is the phenomena of disruption of this regulation, climate change, or let's say the disruption of the earth's regulation. जब humans ज्यादा interfere करते हैं, then this regulation gets broken. Now ये चीज proven नहीं है. This is not proven. If you just remember Gaia hypothesis has something to do with earth homeostasis, it's enough. It's not proven, that's why it's called a hypothesis and not a theory. If it was proven, it would be called a theory or a law. But it's not proven, so it's called a hypothesis. It says that at the level of the earth, organisms interact in such a way that they maintain the conditions of the earth in a self-regulating system. Okay. जैसे कि मान लो अर्थ में कूलिंग हो, अर्थ का टेम्परेचर कम हो, this is the input. The life on the earth will adapt to this cooled earth. The life will adapt to this cooled earth. Then this life would adapt in such a way that it raises the temperature. ज्यादा कार्बन डाइऑक्साइड रिलीज करने लगेगा और समथिंग इट डज ताकि टेम्परेचर बढ़े. Then again the life would change. जब बहुत ज्यादा टेम्परेचर राइज होगा, life would change and adapt, and then again it would lead to a cooling of the earth. तो अर्थ अपना एक ऐसा सिस्टम बना के चलती है, ना बहुत ज्यादा चेंज इस तरफ होने देती है ना इस तरफ होने देती है. It self regulates. This is the Gaia hypothesis. Gaia नाम क्यों रखा? Why the name of Gaia? Because the name Gaia in Greek mythology stands for the goddess of earth. In Greek mythology, the word Gaia represents the goddess of earth. So it is said that earth is a goddess which is capable of regulating itself. This is the Gaia hypothesis. Now, क्या कहता है ये? That the biosphere, lithosphere, atmosphere and hydrosphere, they come together in such a way that they are able to maintain homeostasis on the earth. जैसे global temperature, ocean salinity, oxygen in the atmosphere, habitability of the earth, ये सारी चीजें linked हैं. And there is a presence of a feedback mechanism that ensures that earth की condition बहुत ज्यादा change नहीं होती. For example, ocean salinity देखो. अब ये geography में आपने पढ़ा होगा. Ocean salinity. Ocean salinity on the earth at an average is fixed at 3.4. Right? 3.4 पे fixed है. कैसे फिक्स्ड है? रिवर्स तो कॉन्स्टेंटली दे आर इरोडिंग द माउंटेन्स एंड डिपॉजिटिंग सॉल्ट इन द ओशंस, राइट? Rivers are constantly eroding the mountains and depositing salt in the oceans. How is the salinity fixed at 3.4 parts per thousand? It is fixed. It is actually 34 parts per thousand or 3.4%, whatever you want to call it. This fixing at 3.4, ये average इतनी रहती है क्यों? Because there are some bacterial processes in the ocean that are regulating this salinity. तो जब मान लो deposition of salt बढ़ जाएगा, so the bacterial process will increase and it will maintain the salinity. अगर deposition of salt कम हो जाएगा तो bacterial salt decrease हो जाएगा, bacterial processes decrease हो जाएंगी and the salinity will still stay the same. तो ये bacterial process और deposition of rivers, they are in a sort of equilibrium. ये maintain करते हैं इस level पे ocean salinity को. This is just an idea called the Gaia hypothesis. अगर आप बस basic idea समझ पा रहे हो कि Gaia hypothesis का मतलब क्या है, that is enough. And Gaia hypothesis को predict करने के लिए जो mathematical model है, that is called Daisy World. Daisy World is the mathematical model to predict Gaia hypothesis. इस पे कोई PYQ नहीं आया, कोई पहले question नहीं आया, but I've seen it a lot in recent down to earth articles, so it's possible that they might ask you this term, right? So the term Gaia hypothesis just talks about that earth maintains a homeostasis. Okay. Now, last thing that we have to study is ecosystem services. Services क्या होती हैं? Services is things that we deliver to you. For example, right now I am delivering to you an education service. So what would ecosystem services mean? The services that are delivered to us by an ecosystem. Let's say a forest ecosystem, lake ecosystem, whatever is there, if it is delivering us certain services, That would be the idea of an ecosystem service. Now, healthy ecosystems are the base for a wide range of economic, environmental and aesthetic goods. हम फॉरेस्ट से सिर्फ टिम्बर, मेडिसिन, फूड ये सब नहीं लेते. There are many other services that we are taking from the forest. They are called ecosystem services. And researchers have said that it is actually worth 33 trillion a year. 33 trillion a year we are taking from ecosystem. The services that they provide to us, the services that an ecosystem provides to us are worth 33 trillion. Okay. Ecosystem services are of 4 types. The first type is provisioning. Provisioning का क्या मतलब है? Material benefits. Material benefits like food, water, fiber, wood, fuel. जो चीजें हम डायरेक्टली इकोसिस्टम से लेते हैं, फूड, फ्यूल एक्सेट्रा, ये है प्रोविजनिंग सर्विस. देन देयर इज रेगुलेटिंग सर्विस. इकोसिस्टम आल्सो डज सर्टेन रेगुलेशन फॉर अस. जैसे अगर इकोसिस्टम हेल्दी होगा तो वो सॉइल फर्टिलिटी मेंटेन करके रखेगा, वो एयर क्वालिटी मेंटेन करके रखेगा, वो फ्लड से प्रिवेंट करेगा. ये सारा क्या हुआ? रेगुलेटिंग सर्विस. Then there is supporting service. The ecosystem itself will support the generation of other ecosystem services. कैसे? जैसे वो करा दे न्यूट्रिएंट साइक्लिंग. अब वो न्यूट्रिएंट साइक्लिंग करा रहा है. The ecosystem, a healthy ecosystem is causing nutrient cycling. वो फॉस्फोरस का साइकिल चला रहा है, वो सल्फर का साइकिल चला रहा है, वो ऑक्सीजन का साइकिल चला रहा है, नाइट्रोजन का साइकिल चला रहा है. If it is supporting that, if it is going through these cycles are supporting the provisioning that we are doing. ये साइकिल्स चलेंगे तभी हम इकोसिस्टम से टिम्बर ले सकते हैं, तभी हम इकोसिस्टम से फूड ले सकते हैं. सो दीज आर सपोर्टिंग सर्विसेज लाइक क्रॉप पॉलिनेशन, लाइक न्यूट्रिएंट साइक्लिंग. सो दीज आर सपोर्टिंग सर्विसेज द वे इकोसिस्टम इज सपोर्टिंग इटसेल्फ. एंड देयर आर कल्चरल सर्विसेज. हम जब जाते हैं किसी इकोसिस्टम में, व्हेन वी गो टू अ वाइल्ड लाइफ प्लेस, व्हेन वी गो टू अ फॉरेस्ट, हमें अच्छा लगता है देख के, है ना. वी फील यार ये इको टूरिज्म करते हैं हम, हमें लगता है दिस थिंग लुक सो ब्यूटीफुल. इसकी भी तो एक वैल्यू है. इट हैज एन एस्थेटिक वैल्यू, अ ब्यूटी वैल्यू. सो दैट इज ऑल्सो अ सर्विस दैट इज प्रोवाइडेड बाय एन इकोसिस्टम टू अस. तो अगर हम एक इकोसिस्टम को देखें, वी शुड नॉट जस्ट लुक एट कि यार इट इज प्रोवाइडिंग मी टिम्बर, मुझे ऑक्सीजन दे रहा है, मुझे फूड दे रहा है, मुझे फ्यूल दे रहा है. नहीं, आई शुड ऑल्सो लुक एट द रेगुलेशन इट इज डूइंग, that it is maintaining the air quality, it is maintaining the soil quality. I should also look at the support it is providing to other ecosystems, like support such as nutrient cycling, support such as crop pollination. And I should also look at the beauty and the aesthetic element of it. तो जब मैं एक इकोसिस्टम को कंसिडर करूं फॉर द पर्पस ऑफ इकोनॉमिक्स, जब मैं डिसाइड करूं कि मुझे पेड़ काटने हैं या नहीं काटने हैं, तो आई शुड जस्ट नॉट लुक एट द प्रोविजन, आई शुड लुक एट all of this. This is the idea of ecosystem services. So there are 4 types of ecosystem services. Regulation such as air quality, climate, water, natural hazards, etc. Then there are supporting such as nutrient cycling, soil formation, photosynthesis. Then there are cultural like ethical values, existence values, recreation values, the beauty of it. And then provisioning तो जो चीजें हमें वहां से मिलती हैं, food, fuel, fodder, etc. Right? So when I look at an ecosystem, I should look at all of this. India में cultural services are given a special importance called sacred groves. There are some tribals in India that worship trees. Right? If you are an anthropology student, relate this with the nature man spirit complex. Okay? So this idea of cultural services are also something we need to consider when we decide whether we have to destroy an ecosystem or not. जब इकोसिस्टम सर्विसेज को हम कंसिडर करते हैं, वी कैलकुलेट द ट्रू वैल्यू ऑफ एन इकोसिस्टम. हम सिर्फ ये नहीं देखते हमें उससे क्या मिलता है, वी सी इट्स लार्ज वैल्यू. तो व्हेन वी लुक एट एन एफॉरेस्टेशन प्रोग्राम, मान लो हमने एक प्रोग्राम बनाया दैट वी विल एफॉरेस्ट, वी विल प्लांट ट्रीज, वी माइट थिंक इट इज वेरी कॉस्टली. मुझे तो बस थोड़ा सा टिम्बर मिलेगा एंड लुक एट द अमाउंट ऑफ एफर्ट आई हैव टू स्पेंड. बट नो, आई शुड नॉट जस्ट लुक एट द टिम्बर, आई शुड लुक एट all the benefits that the ecosystem can possibly provide. Right? So this is what the idea of ecosystem services is. अब ये क्यों हो रहा है? Why are we calculating the actual benefit? Because we are all pigs of capitalism. Right? We only understand things in monetary values. जरूरी नहीं है इकोसिस्टम की सर्विसेज की कैलकुलेट करना to save an ecosystem. If I just conserve something, preserve something for preservation's sake, विदाउट थिंकिंग कि मुझे इससे कोई वैल्यू मिल रही है या नहीं, दैट वुड बी द आइडिया ऑफ डीप इकोलॉजी. This was asked in anthropology optional in 2021, animism and deep ecology. It is possible it can be asked in GS, that's why I'm explaining. Deep ecology means that I am preserving for preservation's sake, just because I want to preserve, because I understand that Earth requires ecosystems, I am preserving them. That would be deep ecology. Shallow ecology would be that I care about the monetary value. कि यार मैं पैसे देखूं इकोसिस्टम से मुझे सही वैल्यू मिल रही है या इकोसिस्टम तोड़ के मुझे सही वैल्यू मिल रही है. आई डू दैट थिंग. दैट वुड बी शैलो इकोलॉजी. सो वी आर ऑल influenced by capitalism, so we only think in monetary terms. हम पैसे के टर्म्स में ही सोचते हैं. तो अगर हमें फिर भी पैसे के टर्म्स में इकोसिस्टम को सोचना है तो एटलीस्ट हम उसकी ट्रू वैल्यू तो लगाएं. हम सिर्फ उसकी प्रोविजनिंग वैल्यू ना लगाएं, हम वो जो सर्विस प्रोवाइड करता है उसकी सारी वैल्यू लगाएं. So that would be the idea of ecosystem services. Okay, all right. Now, ये ecosystem related initiative or the calculation of ecosystem service was done through an idea called the economics of ecosystems and biodiversity, PEEB. ये idea दिया था डॉक्टर पवन सुखदेव ने, and he was given the Tyler Prize, which is a Nobel Prize or a Nobel equivalent for the environment in the 2020. एनवायरमेंट के लिए कोई नोबेल प्राइज नहीं मिलता, बट ही गॉट द नोबेल इक्विवेलेंट फॉर द एनवायरमेंट कॉल्ड द टाइलर प्राइज, डॉक्टर पवन सुखदेव, फॉर गिविंग दिस कॉन्सेप्ट. नाउ दिस इकोनॉमिक्स ऑफ इकोसिस्टम एंड बायोडाइवर्सिटी, व्हाट इट वाज डूइंग, इट वाज ट्राइंग टू कैलकुलेट द वैल्यूज ऑफ नेचर इन अ मॉनेटरी टर्म यूजिंग इकोसिस्टम सर्विसेज. कि हम इकोसिस्टम सर्विसेज से पूरे देखें तो सही कि एक नेचुरल सिस्टम की वैल्यू होती क्या है, तब हम डिसाइड करें कि हमें फॉरेस्ट तोड़ना है या नहीं तोड़ना. राइट. So it captures the monetary valuation of ecosystem services, and this capturing of monetary valuation of ecosystem services is what is the idea of a green domestic product. ये term आजकल बहुत ज्यादा न्यूज में है. We will read this in detail when we read sustainable development. But green domestic product, what does it mean? कि when I decide कि मेरी GDP बढ़ रही है, gross domestic product बढ़ रहा है, मैंने वहां से I have cut some ecosystem, I have destroyed some ecosystem for economic growth, then I should also calculate the value of economic services that I have lost. If I have preserved some ecosystem, I decided कि यार मैं ना ये ecosystem है, मैं इसको preserve करता हूं, मैं अपनी GDP नहीं बढ़ाता, कोई बात नहीं, मैं economic development को compromise करता हूं, but let me preserve the ecosystem because of the services it offers. So I can calculate the services it offers in terms of green domestic product to tell myself कि देखो मैंने इतनी वैल्यू बचाई भी तो सही. So it is the economics of ecosystem and biodiversity, the idea given by Dr. Pawan Sukhdev. Now this was a global initiative by the United Nations Environment Program, G8 countries, which is now G7 after Russia's invasion of Crimea, BASIC and Mexico. BASIC stands for Brazil, South Africa, India and China. Okay. It looks into green accounting methodology to calculate green domestic products, and it creates responsibility for conservation and the responsibility for biodiversity because इनकी भी एक economic value है. It is part of UNEP's Green Economy Initiative. Okay, we basically assign economic values to forest on the basis of the ecosystem services they are providing. Okay, this is the economics of ecosystem and biodiversity. This is Dr. Pawan Sukhdev, and this is the paper he wrote called The Economics of Ecosystem and Biodiversity, Ecological and Economic Foundations. Okay. This last thing is payment for economic ecosystem services. No worries, this we'll do tomorrow. This is it for today's class. Those who want to leave can leave. What we're going to do now is we're going to do some PYQs, a test of some PYQs. If you want to leave, you can. I'll just stay here with you for the next 30 minutes, do some questions, and also then we're going to revise some DPSPs. Okay, so if you want to take a leave, I'm done for today. It's exactly 6:30. That's what I promised you. अगर आपको कुछ और पढ़ना है तो you can go, and let's continue with. Yes, in Uttarakhand they are using green GDP. Good that even social farms, sociology students can relate. And yes, this was, Ashita, wonderful that you recognize that. It was a reference to Animal Farm. I love these intellectual things. So if somebody can recognize that, that's great. Okay, all right, let's start with PYQs. I'll give you 1 minute per PYQs. So Start. This I have not taught you, but please use your mind here. Good job. Last question. Okay, all done. So let's discuss the answers. Firstly, again, congratulations. You've now done 20 PYQs on environment, right? Things that you would not have done on your own. We did 8 yesterday and we've done 12 today. So great job on that. Now let's see. Dekho, this I had not taught you, but this is just logical guessing because sum is written here. Sum makes it generalistic. So even if one species of turtle was an herbivore, this statement would be correct. If even one species of fish would be a herbivore, this statement would be correct. If even one marine mammal was a herbivore, this statement would be correct. If even one snake was viviparous, this statement would be correct. Obviously, UPSC is not going to check all of this, so the answer is D. Okay. Now, this, which of the following the main source is rock? So that biogeochemical cycle where there is no atmospheric component. Answer here is obviously the phosphorus cycle, C. Okay. Now, this I had told you that they have asked this multiple times, that where is the water on the earth stored? So the answer here is B, because the first statement, amount of water in river and lakes, is more than the amount of groundwater. No, groundwater is way more than the river and lakes. We have seen that out of the 2.5%, groundwater was a huge component, right? Okay, so second thing is right, because polar and ice caps, out of this 2.5%, 70% was here, 30% was in the groundwater, and the rest was in the river and lake as surface water. So that is what we are seeing. Answer is B. Okay, economics of ecosystem and biodiversity. We have read this. Second and third statement is correct. ऐसा जब भी आपको institutions दिखें, right? Whenever you see institutions in a UPSC question, see them very carefully, because it's very likely that those institutions might be wrong. Usually it's very easy for the examiner to make a wrong institution as a question. So the first statement here is wrong. You just have to eliminate the first one and you would get the answer 2 and 3. Second is obviously correct. It focuses on drawing attention to the economic benefits of biodiversity, and it is an approach that can help decision makers recognize and capture value of ecosystems. That is also correct. Okay. Which of the following is the process involved in photosynthesis? Photosynthesis, of course. Potential energy is released to form free energy. No. Free energy from the sun is being converted into potential energy. What is potential energy? Energy that can be used at a later date, that has a potential. So here, the food or the energy that is being stored, that is potential energy. Of course, food is not oxidized. This C statement is actually respiration. Oxygen is taken and carbon dioxide and water vapor are given out. This is also wrong because oxygen is released. So through elimination also, you can go to this, that the answer is B. Okay, then on planet Earth, again the same question repeated. That was 2013. In 2021, they repeated it again, that where is the water found? So fresh water, after ice caps and glaciers, it is found as groundwater. Okay, this is already there in the slides. Just please read this table properly. Okay, correct sequence of ecosystems in order of decreasing productivity. So you put the maximum productivity first. Obviously, mangroves, they have the phenomena of edge effect, so they will have more productivity. Next, we have to decide between ocean and grassland. So grassland obviously will have more productivity. Ocean has a lot of area and a very small photic zone. So oceans actually will be at the last. So the answer here is C. Okay. Now, which of the following process adds nitrogen to the soil? Burning of coal by man is not going to add nitrogen. It is going to add carbon dioxide. So you can eliminate the second option. Now you are left with 1 and 1 and 3 only. 1 is you don't have to read, but it's obviously correct. And of course, death of vegetation will lead to certain decomposition. So answer is C. Now, Millennium Ecosystem Assessment describes following major categories of ecosystem services. We have seen 4 categories. Here they have given 5. But what you really needed to know is what is a supporting service. The supporting service is nutrient cycling and crop pollination. Now, which of the following adds carbon dioxide to the carbon cycle? Photosynthesis cannot add carbon dioxide. It actually adds oxygen. So if you eliminate the third option, you will be left with 2 only, or 1, 2 and 4. And of course 2 is respiration, so that is clear. 1 and 4 also, volcanic action can release carbon dioxide, and even the decay of organic matter will release carbon dioxide. So the answer is C. Now, this question I had not taught you. Okay, I had not taught you this, but if you just read it and apply your brain, you can understand. We will read this when we read the nitrogen budget and the methane budget. Okay, then we will read this in detail. But still, agricultural soils are releasing nitrogen oxides into the environment. There were denitrifying bacteria that were going to release nitrogen oxides, and agricultural soils had so many nitrates. So it is possible that this thing is happening. Cattle were releasing ammonia. This we know because they do excrete something. If 1 and 2 you know are correct, there is no option of 1 and 2 only. The only option here is 1, 2 and 3. And 3 is poultry industry releases reactive nitrogen compounds in the environment. Even this thing is correct. But अगर आपने ये गलत किया है तो absolutely कोई problem नहीं है, because मैंने आपको ये पढ़ाया नहीं. I will teach you this when we read climate change and the phenomena of pollution. तब हम ये पढ़ेंगे. But just an idea, if you get a question like this is how you're supposed to solve it. Go on possibilities and think broadly. Okay, the last question. This we have read. ये अगर आपने गलत किया है तो problem है. Which of the following are found most likely surviving on a surface without soil? This is basically a question of ecological succession asked in 2021. तो कौन से होंगे? The pioneer species, lichen and moss. Answer is 2 and 3. Okay, so we're done with the test for today. Now let me quickly revise the 1-pager with you first. Okay, this is the 1-pager for today. All right, I hope you can see this. Right, I wish I can just take it to a okay, wonderful. Okay, so we started with basic definitions. Okay, what were the basic definitions? What is the environment? Environment is the surrounding. What is ecology? Ecology is the interaction that is happening in that. Okay, then we read the level of organizations in ecology. What were the levels of organization that we read? We read organism, population, community, ecosystem, biome and biosphere. इनकी definitions हमने पढ़ी थी, right? Then, okay, right. Then we read about the concept of habitat and niche. Here we read that habitat is the physical space and niche is the unique role or the functional space that an organism occupies. इसमें we read about habitat niche, trophic niche, multidimensional niche. Multidimensional niche was fundamental niche and realized niche together. Then we read what will happen if there is niche overlap. There will be comparative exclusion. So there will be Gauss law and resource partitioning. Okay. Then after that we read the concept of a ecotone. Ecotone had something called the edge effect and there was increased biodiversity. It was a zone of tension where there were characteristics from both ecosystems that were around it. Examples were corals, wetlands, mangroves, etc. And new species were found here called ecotypes. We also read the examples of ecotypes like the Royal Bengal tiger. Okay, Then we saw the functional units of an ecosystem. We saw ecosystem productivity. This we have done just today. We saw energy flow in an ecosystem. This was trophic levels. Then we saw decomposition and nutrient cycling. This also we have done today. Now trophic levels were divided as they represented positions of energy flow. Here we read a concept called 1% conversion of sunlight to energy by plants. There were two processes, mainly photosynthesis and respiration. Then we read about primary producers or autotrophs. Autotrophs were of two types, phototrophs and chemotrophs. Then we read about heterotrophs, that are consumers. They could be primary consumer, secondary consumer, tertiary consumer, carnivore, which is tertiary consumer. Then they could be eating dead things like scavengers, and decomposers and detritivores. We also read the examples about them. Okay. Then we read about the 10% law, that it was given by Raymond Lindman, that from one trophic level to the next trophic level, only 10% of the energy is available. Okay. Now, then we read how do we represent these trophic levels. Okay, they can be represented as a food chain, as a food web, or as pyramids. As a food chain, there would be not more than 5 links. Why? Because there is the 10% law, and the flow of energy would be unidirectional. In a food web, it would be more complex, more stable, and it would be multi-dimensional flow of energy. Third would be pyramid. Pyramid we saw 3 types: energy pyramid, number pyramid, biomass pyramid. Energy pyramid is always upright because of the 10% law, but pyramid of number and pyramid of biomass can be differently shaped. Then we saw bioaccumulation and biomagnification. Bioaccumulation happens at the level of individual. Biomagnification is happening when there is an increase in the trophic levels. So there are which substances go for biomagnification? That are persistent pollutants, that are fat soluble, that are non-biodegradable. We also read certain examples of these like DDT. We read about Minamata disease of mercury and vulture deaths happening because of diclofenac given to cattle. Okay. Then we read about some certain biotic interactions, right? हमने इनके examples तो आज ही किए. The biotic interactions we read were mutualism, positive and positive, symbiosis, living together, proto-cooperation, where there was positive effects on both, but it was temporary. Then commensalism, plus and zero, predation, plus minus, parasitism, plus minus. Examples are written here. We've just done them today. Competition, negative for both. Amensalism, -/0. Allelopathy, in this case, there was release of chemicals to the surrounding done by sunflowers, eucalyptus tree, and brown walnut tree. Then there was neutralism, which is rare, which is 0 and 0. Okay. Then we read the concept of ecosystem productivity. In ecosystem productivity, what we read, it was basically biomass generation per unit area per unit time. It could be primary productivity, which would be divided into gross and net primary productivity, and secondary productivity, which would be the productivity of consumers. Certain principles were there for productivity. Lower is more than higher. Lower latitude would have more productivity. Lower altitude will have more productivity. Continents will have more, and ecotone regions will have more productivity. Now, table of productivity, this you need to see from the slides once, but if you keep the principles in mind, it should be easy. Now, last thing we read that I'm going to discuss in this one pager is ecological succession. Okay, ecological succession. Here, this again we have studied today. We read that there are gradual and fairly predictable changes. There is first the pioneer community, then serial, then climax. Primary succession, new soil needs to be formed, but in secondary succession, there is destruction of already existing biotic communities, so no new soil is formed and therefore it is slower. Both hydrarch, that is too wet, and xerarch, that is too dry, would lead to the same mesic level of community. Pioneer species are lichens and moss on land and phytoplankton in wet conditions. Diversity is highest just before the climax, because then there would be competition and finally the climax community would be established. The types of succession were autogenic, means a species within the community were making an impact, allogenic, species from outside were making an impact, autotrophic, where autotrophs dominate, or heterotrophic, where heterotrophs dominate. There were 6 stages given in Kleeman's theory, which were nudation, migration, echesis, then there was competition, then reaction, and finally stabilization. So we have revised the one pager. We've revised what we've done. Only the biogeochemical cycles have not been revised. That we'll revise today. Now let us take some time and do some revision of DPSPs. I'll just make you revise very small number of DPSPs that I had already written. Okay. We'll revise from 41 to 46. Okay. So 41. How do you remember 41? 41 would be, or let me just read your comments. I hope everything is going well. No problem, Disha. It's okay. You can make mistakes here. Just don't make mistakes when you finally do it. Yahan pe it's fine. If you make mistakes here, you will just learn. Mr. Pavan Kumar, please learn to be a little bit respectful. This is all that you need to remember. Pavan, if I make complete notes for everything that I have taught you before, what's the point of a one pager? Will you also do some effort, or if I'm the one who has to make all the effort? And please be a little bit respectful, yaar. What? Good God, like you would write anything. Okay. Anyway, I try not to react to these things, but sometimes they get to my mind, you know. See, it's so you will also have some responsibility. Some reading तो आपको खुद भी करनी पड़ेगी, right? It's not going to be कि मैं आपको सब कुछ ही करा के दे दूँ, right? Some effort you will have to make, and trust me, I am making a lot of effort here. This takes a lot of effort to do. Nobody else is giving you one pagers also and slides also consolidated and revising them in the class. I could have just taught from slides and asked you to make notes. But if I'm trying to help you, if I'm trying to give you a place for active recall, you also make some of the effort, right? And please be respectful even if you have some disagreements. Okay. 41 याद करते हैं. 40 के ऊपर भूल जाते हैं, ये कल याद करेंगे. 41. So 4 minus 1 is what? 4 minus 1 is 3. So 41 talks about 3 rights. Which rights? Right to work, right to education, and right to public assistance. These are the 3 rights that are guaranteed by 41. Now these are not fundamental rights. These are just implications on the state. कि state को ये rights provide करने हैं. Right? So 41, 4 minus 1 is 3. These 3 rights are there. Now, next is 42. 42 weeks. 42 weeks is what the normal gestation period is. Okay. Normal gestation period is 42 weeks. So in 42 weeks, what happens is a lady delivers her baby. Gestation period means the time that has taken to go through a complete pregnancy. So for maternity leave and conditions of maternity, there is 42. Okay. Now 43. If you have read Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, 43 is the answer to life, universe, and everything. Right? I know बहुत ही niche novel है, not most people would not have read it, but just take my word for it. 43 in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy is the answer to life, universe, and everything. So life can then be translated into a living wage. Okay, so 43 is the one that you must get a living wage. So 41, 4 minus 1, 3. So it has 3 things: right to work, right to education, and right to public assistance. 42, gestation, which is gestation means maternity. So 42 weeks a pregnant woman carries a baby normally. So that is a maternity right to get maternity leave and good conditions in that. And 43 is the answer to life, universe, and everything. So 43 would be living wage. Moving on, 45. 4 minus 5 is 1. So we have to talk of people who are 1 year old. So for 1 year olds, what do we need? We need early childhood care and education. Although this is for 3 to 6 year old, but सिर्फ याद करने के लिए 45, 4 minus 5 is 1. So early childhood care and education for 1 year olds. Then 46, 4 minus 6 or 6 minus 4 is 2. So you need to think of two communities, scheduled caste and scheduled tribe. So SC and ST for 46, for 45, 4 minus 5, 1, early childhood care and education. For 47, 47 से याद करो AK-47, and AK-47 can obviously seriously damage your health if used on you. So 47 is the state's responsibility to maintain health, to maintain nutrition and to ban alcoholic beverages. Okay. So अभी हम इतना याद करते हैं आज के लिए. कल हमने 44 याद किया था, 48, 48A, 49, 50 and 51. आज हम याद करते हैं 41, which is 4 minus 1, 3. So these three rights. Okay. Then we'll remember 42, gestation age maternity. 43, life, universe and everything in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. So living wage. Then we'll remember 45, 4 minus 5, 1. So 1 year old, early childhood care and education. 46, 4 minus 6, 2. So for SCs and STs. And 47, AK-47 can seriously damage your health. So that's it for today. I'll just talk to you for 2 more minutes. And then go. Yes, Ishita. Feels like you are too. And if you want to discuss this again, you can just text me on Instagram, not here. Nimbots, these mnemonics I made myself. Chakradha, I'm sorry if I messed your name. Yes, it is possible. And I will be here to help you. Just get through the prelims. Yes, Ramya. Thank you, Ramya. Nikhila, you're right. I should ignore all these comments, but कभी-कभी नजर पड़ जाती है, then it's very difficult to. Thank you, Shivani. Thank you, Meera. Oh, I've not stopped using Forest here. I'll accept the request if you want, but I don't use it anymore. Rashmi, try giving Visions FLT and then see how much you get, and then we'll talk. Thank you, Nupur. No, Manasa, you do not need a big map, but you will need many maps. आप एक मैप पे नॉर्थ ईस्ट करेंगे, एक मैप पे साउथ इंडिया, एक मैप पे नॉर्थ इंडिया, तो दैट वुड बी इजी. डोंट गेट अ बिग मैप, जस्ट गेट मेनी. प्रवचन आज किया तो है सुबह यूट्यूब पे, वो देख लो. डोंट स्किप एनी सब्जेक्ट यार. यस प्रीति, आई विल. बहुत ज्यादा काम हो रहा है यार. इट्स नॉट डिफिकल्ट टू रिस्पॉन्ड टू एवरीथिंग. यार मेरा बस चले तो मैं सारे ही कोर्स ले लूं, बट आई हैव लिमिटेड एबिलिटी एंड लिमिटेड टाइम. ओके, करेंगे कुछ ना कुछ यार 2024 के लिए. ऑल राइट, थैंक यू फॉर योर टाइम. I will see you tomorrow, same time at 4 p.m. Tomorrow we'll do biodiversity and we'll understand a little bit about Indian laws laws around biodiversity, which laws control national parks and what, etc. And then we'll go on from there. Okay. All right. Have a good evening.